Hey everyone, welcome to the Peter Attia Drive. I'm your host, Peter Attia. The drive is a result of my hunger for optimizing performance, health, longevity, critical thinking, along with a few other obsessions along the way. I've spent the last several years working with some of the most successful, top-performing individuals in the world, and this podcast is my attempt to synthesize what I've learned along the way to help you live a higher quality, more fulfilling life. If you enjoy this podcast, you can find more information on today's episode and other topics at peterattiamd.com. Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of The Drive. This week I had two guests. This was a first. I've never interviewed two people simultaneously, which is not to say it's rocket science. I think a monkey can figure it out, and I'm at least as good as a monkey, so I was able to figure it out. But it did stress me out a little bit because I was trying to figure out how do you keep two people engaged. But it seems like we did a pretty good job, and I think you'll enjoy this episode. My guests were two guys who I just refer to as the Brothers Bell, but they're obviously known more commonly by their actual names, Mark Bell and Chris Bell. Some of you may recognize these guys, especially if you're interested in powerlifting or if you've ever paid attention to some really interesting documentaries, in particular, Bigger, Stronger, Faster, which was sort of the breakout performance for Chris Bell. That is, I believe, a documentary that, if you look at all of its downloads on Netflix, would certainly put it in kind of the top 10 docs of the last decade. I could be wrong on that, but I feel like I remember reading that somewhere. Prescription Thugs was also a follow-up documentary. And there are a number of others, including one that is in the works at the time of this recording that we'll link to as well. His brother, Mark Bell, his younger brother, is an absolute legend in the world of powerlifting, and he owns a number of records, all of which are staggering, and we'll get into those during the episode. This was also a bit of a first for me in that it was the first time I interviewed people I didn't know personally. So obviously I'd communicated with Mark and Chris through email a bunch leading up to this, but I didn't have a rapport with them in the way that I've had with every person I've interviewed to date, which actually is a little harder. You have to pay a bit more attention when you're doing your homework. So I hope that doesn't come across as being strained. I don't think it did. I think we were definitely getting along well and having fun. The other thing that may or may not come across here is we were exhausted. We did this interview up at a place that Mark Bell was renting for the month up in Malibu. And so I went up there and they interviewed me for their documentary / podcast. And it took about 3 hours and 15 minutes. We took about 45 minutes off to play patty cakes and grab ass and eat. And then I proceeded to interview them for about 2 hours. So I think by the end of that 2 hours, we were all collectively exhausted. So that may or may not come across. Anyway, all those caveats aside, this was a super interesting podcast because what I really wanted to talk about was not just their stories and their lives, which I think are very interesting and touch on so many of these themes that I've become quite interested in. If you've seen either Bigger, Stronger, Faster or Prescription Thugs, you'll know that their older brother, Mike, died. And they talk about that quite openly in this podcast. And it's quite touching and it's actually quite emotional. Chris gets kind of emotional at one point during this, and it's sort of palpable in the room as we're talking about it. They talk a lot about their parents, their upbringing. I obviously am completely fascinated as to what kind of upbringing could produce such remarkable human specimens, and they are remarkable human specimens. Let's make no mistake about that. I also get into some of the details about like their training, and very fascinating to understand like how relatively low volume their training was and yet how it produced such remarkable achievements. So I guess I would say the following. If you've never heard of these guys and you're not that interested in powerlifting or strength training, I still think you will find this interesting, though there may be some parts you want to fast forward through once we get into the technical details of some of their lifts. If you have any interest in strength training, you're going to want to get to know a lot about these guys. And one of the things I actually learned in the interview, I hadn't even done enough homework before the interview to know this, is the YouTube channel that Mark Bell has, which I've since looked at, and it's an incredible resource for someone who is trying to learn how to do the major lifts correctly. So without further ado, here is my interview with Mark and Chris Bell. Mark, Chris, thank you so much for making time to talk to me about this kind of stuff today.
How you doing?
You know, this is kind of unusual for me. It's two firsts. It's the first time I've interviewed two people simultaneously and also interviewed people that I don't know much prior to this. But I kind of feel
I'll
like
clear
I know you
something up
guys.
for you.
Please do.
You can only interview one person at a time.
Oh, you've learned this during the documentary, I'm sure, right?
It's just the way it is. So if we both talked at the exact same time, then this would not work.
Could be trouble.
We will try to keep that in mind. But I do feel like I kind of know you guys, which is weird. That's I'm sure something that you guys have experienced before when someone's watched one of your films or seen a documentary that you've been in or a part of, and it's sort of like they meet you and they sort of think they know something about you, right? It's you're like, well, I know what this guy's all about because he said X, Y, Z, and so I'll try to free myself up from that.
I get a lot of hugs because of it. People are like, I feel like I know you. Can I give you a hug?
Yeah.
So it just depends on who it is, whether or not I like that or not.
Well, when people do that, what are they thanking you for? Because I'm sure people do thank you a lot.
It's a really bizarre thing. I never thought anybody would thank me for like making a movie, but I guess it's had a profound effect on their life. So they say, thank you for making that. With my film Prescription Thugs, for example, a lot of people will see that and realize like, oh, I have an opioid problem or I have a drug problem. And they'll go do something about it. So I think with Bigger, Stronger, Faster was like more getting off your ass and going to do something with your life and wanting to be somebody. You know, that's something that I think is really important to a lot of people, trying to prove that you're not just another bum from the neighborhood.
You know, the thing about Bigger, Stronger, Faster that I found so appealing and surprising, and I think that's, I would guess, at least part of the reason why 10 years later it's still endured, is the vulnerability of it. You didn't hide your own issues, your family's struggles. I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this, but your parents come across as like the two most lovable people on the planet. Like I actually didn't have the urge to hug you, but if I walked in here and saw your mom, I would absolutely have to give her a big hug. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Was that designed or did that just happen by accident that you realized, hey, I'm just going to show my family?
It was really weird. When we did the movie, we had a lot of great people helping out. My philosophy is like, go find the best people and do it. So like, if you're going to make a documentary, I was like, who's a good documentary filmmaker? Oh, Michael Moore, he's won an Oscar for Bowling for Columbine. I thought Bowling for Columbine was one of the best, whether you agree with the politics of it or not, that's not the point. The point is, it's one of the best written documentaries I've ever seen. And it actually won an Academy Award for the writing of it. And it really inspired me. And I just said, I want to make a movie about steroids. So I want to adopt the same style. So I watched Bowling for Columbine. I literally wrote out every scene from Bowling for Columbine and then tried to define what that would be if it was about steroids, like what that particular scene would be. And in doing that, developed like this style. And then I actually brought people in that worked on that movie. So the editor of Bowling for Columbine was an editor and a help on our movie as well. And that's sort of how I got into making the movie about steroids. That's how I approached it, was getting the best people and putting them in the right spots. So I had learned a lot like in the course of making the movie as well.
Well, he directed the cameras at us once he started to get into some of the basics of the film. I think for a long time you were kicking around the idea of, he knew that there's something magical about Gold's Gym Venice. And he knew something was magical about a lot of the things that we're doing, the environment we're in. But it wasn't until he got into some of the actual ideas of what the film ended up becoming to where he started running through these different scenarios with his producers. And he's like, yeah, my brothers, my brother Mark does this, and my brother Mike, he was doing that, and, I did this. And they were like, wait, hold on a second. Your brothers are taking steroids right now? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, they're like, we need to get that on film.
Yeah, and the point I was getting to is those people that worked on these other great movies were the ones that defined that to me. So when I was on the phone with my producer, Alex Buono, I was like, hey, my brother's Mark's on steroids and Mike's on steroids, and I'm in the middle, and I'm just trying to figure it out. And as soon as I said that, he was like, that's the movie right there. That's exactly what the movie is. It's like you're the middle brother, and you're conflicted whether or not you should take these drugs or not, regardless of whether you've tried them in the past. You tried them once, you felt a little guilty. Let's just tell that story. And what I found is in making films, just being honest and telling the actual real story that's going on is the best place to be. Right now, we're embarking on a documentary about nutrition, and I keep going back to keep trying to manufacture what the movie should be in my head. And I'm like, going back to it should just be what is going on right now. What exactly is going on right now? I'm conflicted about my diet. I don't know how I should eat. I'm trying to find answers, and that's really what it should be, the most honest representation of that, and not a representation of here's what I think about the ketogenic diet and here's why you have to do it. And so by taking this approach, I think it's allowed us to be pretty open-minded about the whole thing.
There's something about that movie also that I've watched it obviously probably half a dozen times, if not more. And each time I see it, I'm struck by this feature, which is the empathy with which you approach people. Even when I think the viewer can tell, like, you don't necessarily agree. So I'm blanking on the boy's name, but the high school kid who'd killed himself.
Taylor Houghton.
Taylor, that's right. When you spoke with his father, that's a very touching scene, because if you're watching that purely through the lens of what the research and the data would say, it's pretty clear that, steroids probably had nothing to do with that tragedy. And, that boy might have ended up in that situation with or without steroids. But at the same time, I think, if I were doing that interview, I worry that I would have come across as condescending or like a know-it-all. But I was very touched by the fact that wasn't at all the case. Like,
he didn't press the issue at all.
No.
The guy just said it. The guy said steroids had nothing to do with my son's death, and that was that. And I thought it was spectacular as well. When you're watching it, like that interviewer right there, even though it's my brother, he had an opportunity to kind of jump on that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wait a second, how could you say that? But it never goes any further than that. And it
didn't need to. That's the beauty, because you were able to sort of, look, there are people where you can cross-examine them, but you don't cross-examine the father who's lost his son. Like, there's absolutely no role for that. And so there's a certain level of civility that I think.
There were other questions where I'm like, I think other ways to approach it, right? Rather than go, I'm going to jump down his throat. Say, well, why don't I just pose a question to him that is comparative? Saying like, hey, look, your son died from steroids. That's what you're saying. That's what you're telling me. He died from steroids, but also, like, my brother died in a sober living facility and drugs were involved. And so, like, I'm trying to compare. And in his case, I was like, well, hey, look, you're going to have a steroid awareness night in this baseball stadium where fathers are going with their 4-year-old kid, and they go and they drink 6 beers and then they drive the kid home. And it's like, what's the difference there? Isn't that ironic? And so I was just trying to, like, figure out ways to not be mean-spirited to the guy, but yet, like, sort of come across where it's like, just make some points to him and hopefully, like, it'll sink in with him. I don't know if it ever did or not. I don't know if it does or not, but that's sort of my approach, is to, like, not really go in there with a mindset of, like, I'm going to destroy this person, because think about it all realistically. We are all human beings. We're all in this big soup together. We're all here. We're all on this planet together, and we all have to function together. So, like, to pick a side and stand there just doesn't seem to make any sense. And what makes more sense is, like, when this movie's over, that guy's still a human being. He still has a family. He still has things going on, right? And so I'm not trying to destroy that guy. I just want to try to figure out what his point is and move past it. And so I think that's, my philosophy is to try to keep the peace so that after the film, we can still continue to have a relevant and smart, intelligent conversation about the subject matter.
So I remember seeing the movie for the first time probably in 2009, and I'm not saying this just because you're sitting here, but I really do credit that documentary with being the thin end of the wedge that got me to begin to revisit a set of beliefs that I had just taken for granted. So one of the challenges of medicine is it's not necessarily a discipline that's full of critical thought. And part of that is just the nature of there's too much stuff you got to learn, so you can't approach it through the lens of intellectual curiosity all the way. It's just, these are a set of facts. Cholesterol causes heart disease. Well, maybe it turns out to be the lipoproteins and inflammation and a few other things. But look, the zeroth order answer is, and of course, one of those hugely dogmatic things is anabolic steroids. That's got to be like one of the most dangerous things on the planet. And so all through my medical training, I'd never really given this any thought. And I just sort of assumed that stuff's got to be bad. And I even remember as a kid when Lyle Alzado died, I remember the cover of Sports Illustrated. I distinctly remember the day he died. I had just come home from a run. It must have been the hottest day of the summer. And I remember, like, reading the newspaper about it, and it was pretty clear, like, Lyle Alzado died because he took steroids.
Yeah,
I was in high school at the time, and it was like, steroids are bad. Your movie comes along, and I collect quotes, right? So I've got, I have a file of just my favorite quotes. I'm going to read you one of my favorite quotes, which I think applies to so many things we do. This was, John F. Kennedy said this, I believe, at a Yale commencement in 1961. For the greatest enemy of truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. Too often we hold fast to the cliches of our forebears. We subject all facts to a prefabricated set of interpretations. We enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought.
It was before we got a man on the moon, huh?
Oh, yeah. That was when the man on the moon was an idea.
All right.
So when I think about Bigger, Stronger, Faster through the lens of that, I realize that my understanding of steroids was primarily the comfort I had of opinion. It was an opinion that had been passed down, but I actually hadn't really submitted myself to the discomfort of thought. And I don't think your movie is meant to necessarily make the case that, hey, steroids are good, steroids are bad. I mean, that's also part of the beauty of the movie is the way it ends with you, Mark, is actually a very powerful ending. It's super powerful. Like the last scene of that movie is one of the most powerful things ever because it deliberately doesn't try to say, here's the answer. But what it did, at least for me, was it said, dude, like, I don't actually know jack about this topic.
Yeah.
So before I form an opinion, I might be wise to start thinking about it.
One of the interesting things about filmmaking is you come across these things by accident. We were editing the movie, and my editor like left the computer on one day and went back to the computer, and there's my dad and my mom, and they're cheering. They're like, yeah, and they're cheering after Mark won the thing, and we're kind of looking at it like, that's kind of an awesome shot to kind of like end the movie on. Like it's like the family, and we're like, look at Mark, he's on steroids, like he's awesome, and that kind of feeling, and
see him hit
so,
a few more dingers.
Yeah.
That part with the Simpsons in there.
So when you're making a movie, there's a lot of happy accidents. Like people go, you're brilliant you went out and got these day laborers and you brought them in your house and you guys made supplements in your kitchen. Those guys worked outside my office. They were there every day. And every day I joked, like, I'm going to just get these guys to make my supplements for me. And I just joke around, like, it's just a joke. Then when it came around at the time where we have to shoot a scene, I'm like, why don't I hire those guys? They're so cool every day. I'd like to put some money in their pocket. So I paid them all $100 to come and make supplements with me. They had no idea what was going on. And I'm sure they probably still don't know that they're even in a movie, but they were, and they were an awesome part of it. It just shows you how wide open this industry is, and like how things aren't what they seem. You think like, oh, a supplement must be made in some factory with everything's all through the FDA, and it's like, no, it's not. The world's just not like that,
So Prescription Thugs sort of carries on in the theme of the same type of investigation, but also it's very, very personal. Right?
Yeah, it's a little darker.
So, I remember the first time I saw it, I was confused at the very beginning because I was like, but wait, their brother died. Did they film this earlier than I thought? And then I realized, of course, no, that was B-roll. Basically, that was film you had before you started making Prescription Thugs, right?
Yeah, and so right off the bat in the beginning, I was like, I want to make this movie. And I just remember I had this phone call with my dad, and my dad's like, my dad was crying, and he doesn't cry that often. Mark will tell you, right? You don't hear him cry. He was kind of like,
seen him cry like twice,
choked up,
pretty much.
And he said, "This is the legacy. This is it, Chris. This is what your brother meant in Bigger, Stronger, Faster." When he said, "I know there's something out there that for the world to hear, but I don't know what it is." He's like, "This is the message that you don't need drugs and blah blah blah, right?" And what was really fascinating about that is my dad comes back around full circle again, the point where I was in trouble and I wasn't doing too well. My dad called me and said, only time he's ever yelled at me. And he said, "I don't know what's wrong with you, but you're a drug addict or an alcoholic or something. There's something going on with you. And I can't figure it out, but you're not right." And I just cried for an hour afterwards, just like, oh shit, I let my dad down. Like that's the worst feeling. I'll get choked up now talking about it. It's like the worst feeling you could possibly have is like you let your father down. And so for me, he was very instrumental in just being there for me and being like, for him to show his anger just once, I think is what saved my life.
Do you remember that time, Mark?
When he was going through some stuff, yeah, of course. Yeah, it was hard. We already lost one, and I guess one thing that's important to share with everybody is that it's never over. People ask a lot of questions about success or getting jacked or bench pressing more weight. You could take steroids and you can do all these different programs and you can do all these different diets, but it's never over. There's never a spot you get to and you're like, fuck yeah, this is perfect. This is where I wanted to be. I'm going to hang out right here. Every once in a while, you catch glimpses of your own set of greatness, right? And it feels good. But with his battle, it took so much support, and it's still a lot of support. There's still a lot of he's come such a long way, but there's still a lot of healing that has to continue to happen for his life to be as prosperous as it possibly can be. And for him to reach, he has a lot of big goals, but he's not even halfway to some of these big goals because he's still in the healing process, and he's heading towards all those things now, which is amazing to see after where he came from. But it was almost like his life kind of restarted at 40 years old or so. And his girlfriend at the time called me, and it was a weird number. I don't even really answer my phone that often, but I was just like, this is a weird hour at night. It wasn't too late, but most people don't really call me past like 7, 8 o'clock. It was like 9, 10 o'clock. And, you know, I hear this voice on the other side, just real frantic and really upset. And I was like, didn't understand who it was. And then she started talking about Chris, and I was like, oh, it's Lauren. Okay. That's why phone numbers from the East Coast and stuff like that. So then I said, okay, well, where is he? What's going on? Can you calm down? Can you tell me more? And I guess he was inside their apartment. She was outside the apartment, and she just didn't know how she was going to find him, like what condition he would be in. And I said, well, as bad as it could possibly be, I was like, you're the only like family he has there. I was like, I need you to go and check it out, you know, because if he's really sick or if something happened, we need to figure out a way to try to handle it. And so I said, make sure you just remove his keys from the house. So that way he doesn't go anywhere. And I said, and call me back and let me know that he's still alive. You know, so she called me back. She was still kind of hysterical. She's like, he's still alive, but he's passed out. I took his keys and I talked to my wife, Andy, who just somehow always knows the right thing to do or the right thing to say. And I talked to her about it. She goes, we're going to book him a flight. We're going to get him up here. And we need to book Lauren a flight too, because if we don't book both of them, he's not going to come. He probably won't be able to get to the airport in the morning, and he'll probably just figure out a way to miss the flight. And we're going to get him here, and we're going to safe-proof everything around us, and we're going to figure out a way to help him. And that's what we did. We flew him to Sacramento. I had a longtime family friend that was an alcoholic herself, and she explained to me, you know, some of the things that we were going to go through that process. She gave me the place to send him for, what is that? Where you go?
Detox.
Detox. There we go. For like 3 or 4 days. You know, they take your phone and they give you certain pills, and it's very strict regimented thing. You no contact with anybody. And, you know, that set everything in motion. But what I always try to share with people, it's a very long process. Even though that was only 3 days, it then led into him going into rehab for another 60 or 70 days. And then it was just constant communication, trying to figure out what he wants, what he needs. I think the coolest thing that came from it all was sitting down with him. And we had kind of this intervention thing, which really fucking pissed me off because he didn't remember any of it, but he did say some things in there that really helped a lot. It helped me a lot, and it helped everybody understand a lot better of what was going on. And he said, I feel alone. And when he said that, I was like, I understand he's in LA and he doesn't, you know, he kind of has a girlfriend, but he doesn't have us. We're not there. He flies up here for Thanksgiving, but he doesn't have family. All he has is a bunch of fake ass motherfuckers around him that are in Los Angeles. That's what Los Angeles is made of. Sorry, LA. But LA is like that. People come and go in your life in a flash. I mean, they do in regular life, no matter where you live, but you see that a lot in Los Angeles. You just meet a lot of people that are striving to be actors, actresses, and you find out that, you know, most of these people are full of shit a lot of times.
Every single day you meet the person that's going to change your life, or they have the deal for you, you know, every day.
But anyway, you know, we were able to surround him. My parents obviously played a huge role in all that, and we were able to, you know, have him here still today. What, 5 years later, 4 years later?
4 years later. Yeah, it's weird because even thinking back to those times, like, that's just not the same person. You know, it's just a completely different person. I guess I was in that body, but I wasn't registered in that body. You know, like now I feel like just a completely different human being altogether than I was a couple of years ago. You know, I think that you have to go through some of these things to get, like, if you want to, for me, there are certain things that I wanted in life, and there was certain things I had to go through to get it, you know, and I never wanted to be a drug addict or an alcoholic, but I thank God for it, because I think that it's helped me to really help other people, and that's sort of the bigger goal is like, well, how can I use all this to help you? How can I use it to help other people? Like all I'm doing, I was inspired when I was a young kid to lift weights and do these things. And so when I got older and realized that it was all bullshit, I made bigger, stronger, faster. I just wanted to help people understand what we
the coolest people in the world asking us questions all the time. Joe Rogan's texting him, asking about the carnivore diet. Donald Trump Jr. is asking me how to improve his squat. I mean, there's some crazy,
I don't know if he's the coolest person in the world, but
there's some crazy, weird shit going on, though.
Yeah.
Who we're kind of unlikely heroes, I guess, in some
it's
weird
really
way.
crazy, the kind of people, even being able to talk to you. It's like you're somebody I've listened to every podcast you've been on.
Chasing him down for a long time.
I've read everything. Like I read all the blogs. I'm like, I just consume this stuff like crazy. So even to like be able to talk to you is to me amazing. And I think that that's something that if we can spread that message to other people that, look, get involved in something, be proactive about it, be excited, get other people on your team and go for it in life. And it doesn't matter what you do, but to me, that's what makes our life fun is like now I have all this opportunity to do all these, fun things. Like Mark and I are going to go see Joe Rogan perform tomorrow night. To me, that's amazing to be able to get invited to do something like that from somebody like Joe. And he's like, hey, you guys want to come? Of course we want to go, and that to me is what it's all about. And what it's all about is like, I just told you about when we did Prescription Thugs. Well, my partner on Prescription Thugs, who's sitting right across the room, is Greg Young, GB Young. And Greg on Prescription Thugs saved my life. He was the person who was able to communicate with the other producers that Chris is in trouble. We have a man down, but he's not going to die. And he wants to save the movie. So he could have easily went to the other producers, who was actually Peter Billingsley, who was the little kid in Christmas Story, Ralphie. He was our producer. But he went to Ralphie and he said, hey, Chris is going to be okay, but he's in rehab and we got a man down and this is serious business and we got to take care of it. And so because he did that, obviously has this loyalty to us, when it came around to make this film that we're making about nutrition, we brought Greg on. Greg, when he started, was about 330 pounds, and now he weighs about 280. So he's already lost about 50 pounds just doing like a keto diet, and he comes and trains with us. And so to me, that's what it's really all about, is like getting in there and helping somebody else change their life, because I know Greg well, and I know what he's going to do is he's going to turn around. He's already told the next 3 people that are going to tell the next 3 people and tell the next 3 people. And all it is we're getting people on the side of being healthy. That's all we're trying to do.
Yeah, his mental health has improved big time. He's more determined. He's in the gym now. He's never been in the gym before, which that takes a lot of courage to even work up the steps just to even get your butt in the gym. And before, he said he didn't even want to get up off the couch.
And the thing with it is like we're not really selling anything. We're just trying to help people with their lifestyle. Mark sells products, obviously, and that allows us to be able to do these things, which I think is a really cool.
Yeah, our X for everything is 10-minute walks. Go lift some weights. Stop being so fat. Stop eating such gross foods. Like that's our prescription for everything.
Yeah, but again, I think what's interesting is it doesn't come across, at least to me, and maybe that's because I've gotten to know you guys a little bit since you first reached out to me, but it really doesn't come across as the way a lot of people in the fitness space come across, which is, again, I'm not going to name names, although I've got a long list of people that I think are complete and total douchebags in this space.
Those names.
Yeah. Occasionally, my Twitter account will release my criticisms of some such individuals. But, there's this sense of, look, you just got to work harder, without acknowledging, hey, man, if you're down in the dumps, if you're 330 pounds and you're eating poorly and you're sitting on the couch, like, it's not just a matter of willpower. Like, you have to make some other changes to at least get the inertia to make these changes. And I just think it comes down to this. I suspect it comes down to something you can only learn having suffered.
What's amazing to me is like through doing this, like Greg's a guy that I work with, you become closer to the people too. And so you're drawing your friends in more, right? You're rather than like pushing your friends out and excluding them from things, like you're sort of including them now in everything. And it's easier to be friends with somebody that has the same dietary habits as you. It's easier to be friends with somebody that does the same things as you, has the same habits. And like, if I want to be successful, I'm not going to let their bad habits sway me in a bad way. I'd rather let my good habits sway them.
And building on that, I think people sort of don't realize that once you start to let down sort of barriers and you can sort of communicate this vulnerability about your own struggle in this case, it's amazing what that does for other people. because I think many of us kind of go around thinking we're the only ones struggling with problem X or problem Y. I've talked about David Foster Wallace a number of times. He's sort of someone I obviously never had the luxury of meeting, but I love his work. And he's talked about this so eloquently, right? Which is every single one of us is only experiencing the world from our own vantage point. Right. We only know what's in our head. We only know what we see. And it's so easy to think you are alone, which goes back to what you said earlier, which is Chris is he's fallen apart because he feels alone.
Perspective is such a huge thing, and a lot of times it's easy to be judgmental. But I think about my own life, and I think I had two what I would consider perfect parents. Both my parents were there for everything. My dad was like our baseball coach, and I can't remember my dad ever telling me no, that he couldn't hang out with me or throw a football around with me or whatever. I can't remember a time where my mom didn't cook dinner. Like, they were just around. There was no shortage of...
We can't complain.
No shortage of like resources, basketballs, weights, money, no shortage of hugs, no shortage of love, no shortage of encouragement. So when somebody asks me certain questions about whether it's my lifting or whatever, my lifting, I started out in a way different spot than maybe somebody else. Maybe somebody else grew up with abusive parents. Maybe they didn't even find fitness until they were 40. Whereas I found it at 12 because we had it in our basement, because I was privileged enough to have parents that were always heading in the right direction, always trying to do right by the family. And we were really trying to, build towards something. Whereas there's other people that maybe their dad wasn't around, maybe their mom wasn't around, or maybe they're alcoholics, or maybe they're being abused, or who knows. The list of things is unbelievable, but your starting point is a big factor in where you start to end up.
And Mark talks about that a lot, and I think that's he says not everybody starts at the same spot, and so we can't really compare ourselves to other people. Mark and I right now are training with Mike O'Hearn. Mike O'Hearn's a freak. Ever since he was 14 years old, he looked like a professional bodybuilder, right? So
he's known as having the worst transformation in the history of the world, because at 14, or actually more like 16 or 17, he looks the same as he does now at 48.
Yeah.
He's always been jacked. So
exactly. And so, for us, we're like, man, if we were to compare ourselves to him, we just feel like crap every day. If I compare myself to Mark, I'm going to feel like crap every day, because he's bigger than me and stronger than me and leaner than me. Right now, he's getting ready to do a bodybuilding show. But, in my head, my goal is to try to beat him. Like we're still brothers. So in my head, I'm starting way back from him, and I'm not comparing myself to him, but I still, in some weird way, go like, man, I hope I surpass him somehow. I hope I can sneak in. I'm hoping he, after his bodybuilding show, he has one too many days of cheating, and I can still beat him in something. But, I used to always beat him in powerlifting. I used to tell him emphatically, you will never be as strong as me. I would tell him, you won't even get within 100 pounds of my bench press. And for a while that was like so true. And then now I'm not even close to him. So it's like, it's funny how those things happen and can reverse.
Never say never.
Yeah. Never say never is right.
To me, the journey is kind of everything. My brother, he has a more eloquent way of saying it, and I'll sort of bastardize it. But the gist of it is, you don't judge a man by where he stands. You judge him by how far he's traveled to get there. And
pretty awesome.
Yeah, I always thought of that. I mean, he said this even when we were young, and I remember, I think I just always grew up with such a chip on my shoulder that whenever I sort of felt myself being compared to someone who was better than me, or that I would assume was more privileged than me, I would not necessarily verbalize it, but internally I would think, well, screw them. I've traveled I might not be where they are, but I've traveled way further to get here. And, I've always been
negative energy. It doesn't help your situation at all.
Totally, right? Yeah. And I'm still kind of, completely fascinated by whatever it is that motivated the three of you as brothers to be, trying to be anything other than ordinary. And again, I don't think anybody just wakes up and says, I'm programmed to be ordinary, but you guys have accomplished kind of remarkable things. I mean, I want to come back and talk about the physical stuff, because I'd like to be able to put some of that in perspective for people who don't really fully understand what some of these lifts mean. And so we'll certainly come to that. But it's interesting because it's not the story I would have expected, right? What I would have expected is something in childhood wounded you guys. and it's like your entire adult life has been a way to cope with some pain, and that's been channeled into mostly positive things, but then sometimes it's gone off the rails. Like, that's the narrative I would construct if I didn't have any background.
I really, honestly, when I said January 23rd, 1984, it was a day that changed my life forever, I meant it. I really meant it. When Hulk Hogan beat the Iron Sheik, we were fanatics. We were nuts, man. We were like, we loved it so much, and we wanted to be part of that. With that, all we could see is ourselves inside of a wrestling ring.
We had the ability to dream because our dad provided, and mom provided, that for us. That's all we had to worry about as kids, was to dream big. That's it. That was the only thing. When I remember like the smell, I remember everything about like getting our first Nintendo. You know what I mean? I remember all these different things. I remember watching that match. I don't know about how old I was.
Yeah.
7, I don't know.
There's just such a difference.
But I really remember those. Those are really strong memories for us.
And I don't know, there's just such a difference from when we got involved in watching wrestling to before it. Like, I don't remember anything before it. I just remember I actually don't even remember, to tell you the truth, not even January 23rd. It was before that. January 23rd was the big day where Hulk Hogan pinned the Sheik. But before that...
This was WrestleMania 1, correct?
That was before that even. This was 1984. WrestleMania 1 was like 87.
No.
Or 85.
Was it that
85.
late?
85 WrestleMania 1.
Was WrestleMania 1 with Hulk Hogan and Mr. T?
It was the year after. Yeah, it was after he had the belt for you or whatever. But yeah, before that, Mark and I were watching wrestling, and Mark used to have to hold the clothes hanger. Like, we had a metal clothes hanger that was attached to the antenna.
That was my job.
So that we could get, so that the TV coming.
I could never really watch it. I could kind of be like,
he had to like hold it. But he was only like 5. Seriously, he was like 5 or 6 years old.
And Mike was 2 years older than you.
Yeah, a year and a half older than me.
You're 4 years older than Mark?
Yeah. So he was like a little kid. He's like 5. Maybe I'm 10, right? And Mad Dog's like 12. And we're watching wrestling, and we're watching this body slam challenge. Every time Big John Studd would come out, and they'd hold up the bag full of money, and they'd be like, we're going to $25,000 body slam challenge. Anybody?
The smallest bag for some reason.
Yeah, a tiny little bag. And
only like dollars in there too, not even hundreds.
And we're like excited, like, who's going to try it this week? And we know the guy's never going to get him and body slam him. Who's going to get him this week? And it's like Chief J Strongbow. So we're kind of bummed out. Like, Chief J Strongbow, he's not going to do shit, So Chief J Strongbow like walks out, and he's standing there, and he just starts shaking his head like, no. He's like got his hands crossed. He's like, no. And he turns around, and Andre the Giant walks out behind him. And we're like, oh my God, it's Andre. And we were so excited. We thought Andre was going to come down and slam him and take the money. But it was even better because Andre came down and tried to slam him. And then the manager smashed him in the back, and Andre took the money and threw it out to the whole crowd. To us, like, those moments were like bigger than life. They were the hugest things that happened to us. Like, so much to where my dad would always, say, hey, if you guys want to do something special, I'll do one thing a year. And it was always like, let's go to Madison Square Garden and watch wrestling. Let's go to WrestleMania. It was always something to do with wrestling. So for us, it was a huge influence on our lives. Were just like what we saw in the movies and on TV. And we lived it.
Yeah. I do think seeing our dad be in a suit and tie every day was not anything that we wanted for ourselves either. And he worked for IBM, and he poured so much into that job. He would do anything for that company. And he worked there for nearly 20 years. I think right around the time he got to a point where he would get some privileged things upon retiring, like around 19 years or so, is when they let him go. And it was like, wait, what? Like, all this work that you put all this time into, you're just out the door. And he realized it himself. Like,
that was a huge lesson for us.
Well, he said later he told us he had no ownership of anything. He's like, I didn't own the fucking stapler. I didn't own the paper that they had. He's like, all I owned was myself.
He's like, I just worked there.
So, and after that, I think he had like a knee surgery and some things. So he went through his own process, but went through probably a lot of personal development, which maybe he didn't even really realize that he needed to go through, because he was stuck in corporate America. He was like frozen. His brain was frozen in time, where it was corporate America and family, corporate America and family. You go back and forth between those two things. It didn't leave time for anything else. But when he lost his job, I think he paused for a minute, took a breath, and said, I'm actually really smart. I'm going to be an accountant. He was already doing some of that. I'm going to go into real estate. He picked back up. I think within 3 years, he was not only making the money he was making at IBM, but he was doing it and then some. Our grandfather was an entrepreneur. Our grandfather could tinker and fix anything. He had a used car lot, and I think a lot of our creativity
in their own backyard.
Yeah,
which was
yeah,
kind
in
of
his
awesome.
own, yeah, it was his own yard. He built his own home. You know, so when I look at my grandpa and I look at my dad, like I feel like he and I are giant steps backwards compared to what those two are able to accomplish.
Well, there's something you said that I find really quite powerful, which is despite the fact that your dad was working for the man, busting his ass, he'd give anything for IBM. He still gave you guys everything.
Yeah.
You know, you said
Absolutely.
you never were without a hug. There was never a moment when you wanted to play with your dad and he wasn't there. And so my guess is that would make it a lot more palatable when you get shit on by the man. Because can you imagine the guilt that would rest upon you if you're doing all this stuff in service of your family, right? You're working this hard to provide for your family, obviously. But in the process, you got to make these hard sacrifices to not spend time with your family. And then in the end, you get the shaft.
So that's where my mom came in. She had the strength to pull him aside one day and say, "You're not here enough." And he was like, "What?" He was like, "I'm trying to be." She's like, "Yeah, you keep getting these promotions, you keep making more money, but you're not here." And he was like, "Oh my God, I didn't," like he got lost in it. He didn't know. And so my mom pulled him back in, and that really helped.
Were your parents athletic when they were growing up?
No.
Our mom was.
Our mom was slightly, but she came from a big family, and she was the babysitter. You know, she had a lot of responsibility as a young woman.
Like literally raised, her
she
sisters.
raised 7 other kids basically. You know, my grandmother at the time, was going through alcoholism as well, and same with our grandfather. So our grandfather was the chief of police on my mom's side in the family, and he was dealing with alcoholism, and he dealt with that up until he died. My grandmother got sober, and she'd been sober for 30-something years, I think, when she passed away, which was like last year maybe.
Our grandparents lived down the street from each other, and we would go. We didn't realize the dynamics of that until we got older, that my dad and mom met on the bus, and my dad like winked at my mom or something when they were like 13. But they were literally like just a few
neighbors,
few football fields away from each other. But when we go to my mom's side of the family, the house was real dark, and you didn't want to hang out there as a kid. It smelled like alcohol. It smelled like cigarettes, and it just had unease, just sitting, just like fogging through the whole household. You just knew you didn't want to be there. You didn't know why, but you knew you didn't want to be there. No one was mean, really, but it
was like kind of like the movie
depressing.
The Fighter, where everything was like the house is just depressing. You know, it's like, ugh. Yeah,
but then we would go to my dad's side of the family, and everything was like bright, and everything was wide open, and
somebody's dressed up as Santa Claus on Christmas.
Somebody's swinging around an axe randomly for some reason, some unsupervised kid, and then someone's got
my grandfather
tennis ball, and somene's got a wiffle ball bat.
Our grandfather would pull stunts, so he would pull stunts like he'd blow out his birthday candles, and the cake would fall through the table. He would just do crazy,
and he'd film it.
He was
a filmmaker.
He was a filmmaker. He would blow.
He filmed everything.
He'd blow his candles, and then the cake would go flying across the room and smash into the wall. And as kids, we're like, "Oh my God!"
He'd film it, and he thought it was
he would do
funniest
things
thing.
like he'd put like a little pulley and a string underneath, and he's like, "When I blow out the candles, I'm gonna make the cake fly across the room. The kids are gonna go nuts." And it was always my grandfather every single year, and they still do it in our family. You pull the rope because he would always put the trap for Santa Claus. So the day after Christmas, you pull the rope, and you always get Santa Claus's boot, and it's full of candy, and that's what the kids do every single year, and they still do it in our family because my grandfather started those traditions. So
it's so great when you're like 14, you're like this stupid.
Yeah,
you know
you're out there, you're like, I gotta still pull the rope. You know,
come on, Grandpa.
But I think those things that are ingrained in us. We had a great life growing up. We had a fun life. Growing up, we used to go fishing with our grandfather and things like that. And we just grew up close.
When did you realize, just from the standpoint of strength, you guys weren't normal?
I was in 11th grade, and I had my knees were really bad. And when I was in 10th grade, yeah, and my knees were really bad. They just always hurt, and I had no idea why. And so I went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, "Oh, you got these bone spurs in your knees. We got to remove them." So he did this like arthroscopic knee surgery, and I had to be off my feet for a couple weeks or whatever. And I did that, but I was always in pain. I didn't really know why. It's because I had arthritis, but I had no idea when I was younger, and nobody diagnosed me with it at all. So I was playing football at the time, and I went to see this chiropractor who was also our strength coach, and he taught me how to squat. And so it just started out where Mad Dog was going to the gym all the time. He was playing football and he was really good. And he could squat like 400 pounds or something. I just remember.
At what age?
He was 16.
Yeah, he was strong.
Like that. He was pretty strong. And I was like,
aggressive.
Man, and Mad Dog's pretty strong. And then by the time he was like 18, he was even a little bit stronger. And my chiropractor, this guy who was trying to help me fix my knees, said, well, to fix your knees, you need to squat. And I said, oh, no, I've been reading the bodybuilding magazines. That's the last thing you want to do. It's bad for your knees and it hurts your knees. He's like, no, it doesn't. I've been a powerlifter forever. Just trust me, just squat. And I was barely into even like working out. So I started with a broomstick. And I just prided myself in going back to that doctor every time, not every day, but like once a week, saying like, hey, now I did 100 pounds. Now I did 110 pounds.
And you're how old here? Like 12?
16.
16.
16
okay.
at this point, yeah.
Yeah, and this guy squatted 700 pounds at around weighing around 200.
I'm like 16 years old, turning 17
this guy was
about.
strong as shit. He's
And I
jacked.
started squatting a broomstick. And within 6 months, I'm squatting 315 for like 8 reps. People are like, what is going on with this guy? People in my school were going like, this is weird. By
And
the
when you
time
say that, you are at this point, are you doing like top of the thighs or breaking parallel, like a
Yeah, these are
powerlifting squat?
powerlifting squats pretty much.
there were powerlifting squats. There was nobody really
Yeah.
Just
judging
training,
me
but-
at the time.
Yeah.
But then pretty soon I was up over 500 pounds, like in high school, squatting over 500 pounds. And squatting over 500 pounds for working out, doing reps.
We responded really well to not doing a whole lot. So we'd go in the gym and we'd do one heavy lift and we would leave.
I'd leave.
And
Yeah.
our coach, we had like a guy that was trying to coach us, and he was like,
Bell Brothers, just squat and leave.
he's like, you don't
come
even
on.
do any assistance work. We're like, yeah, that's all we need.
Who needs it?
And he ended up squatting 675 that way at around 18 or 19 years old.
Yeah. So I don't.
So we were like, no, we think it's working.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think the fact that less training stimulus helped, and we were like really into Mike Menser. We were just talking about him
Yep.
before. And Mike Menser was our uncle's favorite bodybuilder, and he was all about like doing less and getting away with like just going in and working really hard for a short amount of time. And we took those lessons, but we realized that we were strong early on. But for Mark, what was insane was there was this day. It's like this is sort of the day lifting started, like the day lifting began, like for
Yeah,
the
you
whole
would
world.
go into like a Rocky montage after.
Yeah,
seeing
if this was the movie of Mark's life, there's this day where my cousin Steven came over to visit. Steven's like, I know I can't bench as much as you, but I know I can probably.
Steven's his age.
Yeah, Steven's my age. He's like, I'll
4
kill
years
Mark.
older.
And I'm like, I don't think you will. And he's like, no, I'll kill Mark and bench. I can bench like 205.
Smelly.
Yeah, I'll kill Smelly and bench.
That's the thing.
And so they get on the bench, they start going. It's like 135, 145, 155. We just keep going up and up. And I'm thinking Mark is really getting strong. Like whatever we've been doing, it's been working. We get up to around 205.
Doesn't have any idea how strong I am because he's only had me do sets of like 6 to 10 reps usually. And as we were going up in weight, we just kept adding 5s and 10s and 5 and 10, 5 and 10.
Finally,
and so on.
I got him on this bench off with my cousin. And my cousin fails at like, I don't know what he failed at, but then like 205 or something. And Mark did like 240 or 250 pounds.
At
And
what age?
He was
Probably like 13.
13, maybe 12 or 13, like young, like what the
Wow.
hell is going on here?
I definitely didn't look like I could do that. You
My
know,
mom
body
actually on
didn't
the,
look
on the
like it.
same day, my mom benched 135 and she had never lifted in her life. She just picked it up off the thing.
And it was
did
weird too
And we
because
were like,
she just was like this and she
Well,
started laughing.
all in like sinking into her boobs and everything.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
boom. And she just like smashed it out. And we're like, oh my God.
Yeah, you guys remind me of a family I grew up with, which is just, and it's actually, the sad thing is it's an equally tragic story. So not that anyone listening to this will ever, I don't know if they'll ever hear this, but their name was the Stuperics. So there was Rob, Matt, Russ, and there was one other, Stuperic. And they were from another planet in terms of strength. So, even though boxing was my thing, like I found a great place to lift weights, which was this dungy little gym at the University of Toronto that was mostly just grown men powerlifting.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was me and my best friend from high school who were like, they hated the fact that we were there. But by the end, they grew to respect us because they basically got us into powerlifting. And it's so funny. Everything you say reminds me exactly of the Stuperics, which were they literally only benched or squatted or deadlift, nothing else. And their strength was redonkulous. I remember, I think it was Rob, at a weight of 185, he had hurt his shoulder so bad that he could only narrow grip bench. And he's narrow gripping 385 for 10. like here.
It's like, because my shoulder hurts, so I got to go narrow.
His shoulder hurts, so I got to go narrow. Transmit more of this to my tris. Yeah. And these guys were freaks of nature. And I don't know if any of this shit was true, but the rumor was that they were, they came from Viking stock. And their mom could apparently bury any one of their friends in an arm wrestle if they brought a friend home.
That's great.
Like, you want to arm wrestle their mom, you're going through the table.
It's like, it's funny because we were like that, but we weren't even the strongest kids in our high school, or we weren't even the strongest kids in our area. I mean,
come on.
In Poughkeepsie, I think it's like in the water or something. I mean, there were people, we were the strongest. We were by far, we'd kill people in strength. But we had dudes that were huge in high school that were just like monsters. That
we went to a pretty big high school. I mean, when I went to school, but you were just smaller.
Yeah, well, a lot of people did steroids in Poughkeepsie. So when I grew up in Poughkeepsie, I had a belt that said "Roid sucked" on it. It said "Roid suck," and it would make everybody in the gym mad because everybody was on the juice, and I was stronger than all of them. And they would get so pissed because they'd see me coming in squatting 600 pounds.
A lot of young people that were on steroids then too.
Yeah, and they'd see the belt, "Roid sucks," and they're like, "Oh, you're on shit." Blah, blah. Like everybody would always say that I was on stuff, and I just never was. It just didn't happen. So to me, all growing up, it was funny that I ended up making bigger, stronger, faster because I had that written in big block letters across the back of my belt. "Roids suck," and I ended up making this movie about steroids and talking about how maybe they're not that bad.
So how old were you, Chris, when you peaked? And give me. Well, first of all, let's take a step back.
Thanks.
Can one of you guys explain? Yeah, exactly.
I'm done.
You're done. It's all downhill. One of you guys want to take the liberty of explaining to the listeners what powerlifting is, what Olympic lifting is,
Sure.
and why those are sports in and of themselves?
We'll let Mark do that. He's the expert.
All right, Mark, tell us what they are.
So Olympic lifting is what you might see on TV when the Olympics come around. Powerlifting is not an Olympic sport. Olympic weightlifting is a clean and jerk and the snatch. Those are the exercises that you do. Basically involves taking the weight from the floor and figuring out some way to get it over your head. There's different rules in both of them, but that's the gist of it. You get 3 attempts on both of those lifts, and the accumulation of both of those lifts is called your total. So in powerlifting, you do a squat in this order, bench press, and then a deadlift. And you get 3 attempts at each one of those. And the accumulation of those, that goes into what is called a total. Powerlifting is really difficult because it's hard to have leverage on all 3 of those movements. Olympic lifting is very difficult, but it requires a whole different skill set. Mobility becomes a big factor. Speed becomes a big factor. You're trying to basically move your body around the barbell. Whereas powerlifting is not even a good...
You're moving the bar.
Yeah, powerlift. It's just not even a good term for it because it's not really a definition of power. But
right, power has a speed component to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, which just seems more conducive.
And you are doing it as fast as you can, but it's so heavy it doesn't look fast.
Yep.
Yeah. But in powerlifting, for the squat, we're required to try to get our hip crease below where the knee is, which is always in controversy because the human body can't process looking in 2 places at once. So that rule should have been changed a long time ago, but it never has been. So that's the squat. When it comes to the bench press, you need to pause the weight on your chest for a moment. The referee will say press. You press the weight back up to full lockout. And the deadlift is pretty simple. You just pick the damn thing up from the ground and until you're able to stand up with it fully erect, as they say.
Hey now.
And then they just give you a down signal, and that's powerlifting.
And you alluded to something earlier, which your numbers are actually quite interesting. So I was not a particularly good powerlifter. I just did it as sort of ancillary training for
Let's
boxing.
talk numbers.
Yeah, so at a weight, I weighed 158, 160. My bench was my weakest. I think my best was 270 or 275.
It's respectable. So let's just say 275.
Okay.
So
my squat was about 495. I think pound for pound, that was my best lift. And my deadlift was about 505.
This
So
is
just
an
a
honest
little
man here. He didn't even give himself the 5-pound bump on the squat.
So you would agree, though, that I was more of a squat deadlift guy than a bench guy. I was a pretty weak bench guy, actually. I was
You
the
see that
weakest
a
guy
lot,
in the
though.
gym.
Like Mark said, you can only be good at one, and we were really good at bench press. Well, that was our main thing.
Yeah, sometimes you're good at 2, and sometimes somebody might be somewhere in the middle of the road on all 3, and then they're able to raise up all 3 over years and years.
But your PRs, Mark, are remarkable. I don't have them here, but if I recall, you actually benched more than you deadlifted at a PR. So give me your PRs.
First of all, there's kind of 2 parts to my lifting career, or maybe even 3 parts, but I guess to make it more simple, I used powerlifting gear, which is supportive gear that gives you assistance that allows you to lift more weight. It started out being protective, and then the companies made things more and more extreme, and so therefore you're able to actually lift more weight. I did a 1,080 squat, an 854-pound bench press, and a 766-pound deadlift, and that's all in equipped powerlifting. When it comes to raw lifting, in the gym, I've squatted 700 pounds raw before. I benched 578 in competition, and I think my best deadlift might be like 715, I believe, somewhere in that range. So you can
so right now, that's an interesting distinction. To be clear, raw means no knee wrap?
Yeah, so the raw powerlifting that I did was no knee wraps, no squat
So
suits.
belt only?
Belt only, yeah. Belt, wrist wraps, that would be it. Sometimes people still consider knee wraps being raw just because you're not wearing like a squat suit or a bench shirt. But yeah, those were the numbers. At that time, I was so locked into what I was doing. I did every and anything that I could to be stronger. You know, I've made the statement before, and it might sound arrogant, but I just said, you know, if you met me at that time, I would have been the most savage power lifter you would have ever met. Not because of my strength. I wasn't the strongest guy in the world. Although I posted numbers that rivaled some of the strongest guys in the world for that time, I was as strong as I could be. I don't think I could have squeezed any more out of that. I pushed it as hard as I could. I got as big and as heavy as I could. I tried eating healthy to get big. I've tried eating disgustingly gross to get big. I've tried to do all kinds of different things, and I think I pushed that envelope pretty good. I think maybe the one thing that could have been a little bit better is I could have slept a little bit better looking back at it, but I was just so big it was hard to sleep.
I think he's right on that. I mean, we know a lot of people in powerlifting, and he just put everything into it. You know, there was times where just like even the amount of food he would eat and stuff, and I would say like, aren't you worried about this or that? And he's like, I'm just worried about winning. You know, like he wasn't worried about everything was so laser focused in on these big lifts and these big weights, and the amount of energy and the amount of seriousness like it was, and it was so dead serious in the gym all the time because like kind of was life or death. When you're squatting 1,000 pounds, there'd be like a lot of fights and arguments in the old super training because it was highly competitive, and people would, you know, like somebody would mess up, like just getting the rack. Somebody would go to rack it, and they wouldn't put the monolift down in time.
The wrong way or whatever.
Yeah, they yell at each other and get into a fight, and it was just so aggressive and crazy.
A lot of intensity.
It's sort of where you had to go to get there in the sport of powerlifting.
So what were your PRs assisted?
So I did like 675 squat. I never did raw powerlifting, never came into the fray, like as far as I was there, but I was actually there. It's interesting. I was there before the equipment was really good, but not when it went raw. So really like a single ply squat suit. I did like 675 squat. I did a 472 bench in competition, but in bigger, stronger, faster in just a bench competition. I did 501 in a bench shirt. I think the best I ever did in the gym was like 585. That's with a shirt. The best I ever did, I think, raw in the gym is 500. But, you know, now I blew out my shoulder, and those things don't work like that anymore.
To give some people perspective, you know, everything in my gym is specialized. The plates are specialized. The barbells are specialized. At the time when I was lifting those big weights, we had a bar which is called the Iron Wolf bar. And this thing has so much crazy knurling on it. It's like a cheese grater that it kind of ruined the inside shape of our squat rack, because when you try to move the weight around or roll it at all, it would shear metal off of there. And if you went to duck underneath it to do a squat, it would tomahawk you. It would just freaking cut the top of your hair right off. Like it just boom, like a razor. So everything in there is specialized, and that bar was designed that way so it stays sturdy on your back. And it was extra thick so that there was no whip when you're trying to squat, because when you have that much weight on your back, if the weights are flopping around, it's going to be really hard to try to stabilize it, and you're going to end up probably falling on the ground. And then also we had, you know, we use kilo plates, which are super, super thin, or we had to always buy, you know, thinner 45-pound plates. And to give people an idea of what some of this stuff looked like, I mean, it'd be very common to walk into Super Training Gym on a Tuesday or on a Thursday night. Tuesday was a big squat night. Thursday was a big bench night. And you would see 6, 7, 8, 9 45s on each side of the bar. one time just to do it, just because I wanted to try it. I could have easily used our kilo plates and stuff, but I was doing some math and I was like, holy crap, I can bench press 20 45-pound plates. I'm like, I'm going to fucking try that tomorrow. And so it was 10 45-pound plates on each side, if you can envision that.
How much is that?
And now that's a special bar too, because it has an extra
That's 900 pounds plus the bar, 945.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, right.
Damn.
Yeah, and I did it off of boards and stuff.
In context for people, like for me, I understand these numbers because I just know, like, even just like I remember this, like I was never even able to get 225 for 10. I could never quite get there, which I always thought was like, until you can do 225 for 10, you're not actually benching. And I remember like I could only get to about 8, and so I was just such a pathetic bench presser. But I also know like how heavy that is. So when the numbers you guys are talking about, like I don't even understand what 857 bench press means. Like how do we? I'm just trying to think. Like you could bench press the back of a car. You could lay under a car and at least get the car out of its suspension.
Right. I don't know an easy way to try to explain something that's a little bit complicated to people that might not understand it. All I know is that typically when you go into a commercial gym, somebody might be moving around a plate, 2 plates, maybe 3 plates, and the strongest guy at some of these commercial gyms, sometimes they're pretty strong, but usually you're going to see somebody use 405, 4 plates on each side. It was very common that week in and week out at my gym, and still is very common, where there's groups of people, one after another. I guess where you can make a comparison is a friend of mine was a collegiate wrestler, and he ended up being an alternate on the Olympic team. And when he went to train at the Olympic Training Center, he said he remembered there were some guys there after he was there for a while. There's some guys there that would brag, and they're like, oh, I'm an All-American from this place or that place. Or I'm, All-State from this college or whatever their thing was, whatever their championship was. And he was just like, we all are. What's special about you? You're not a special snowflake, And so inside the walls of the gym, as we were building up and making ourselves a lot stronger, that's what we would see day in and day out. It was just commonplace to see somebody squat 700 pounds, 800 pounds, deadlift 800 pounds, things like that.
Yeah, I think that was I took it for granted as a kid that from my first exposure lifting weights, which was starting at 13 till 19, I only knew that one gym.
Yeah.
So I only knew exactly what you're describing, which
that's
is
all we knew.
We were the weakest, me and my friend were like the little babies there, but you would see these guys who were simply from another planet, and everything was only counted in plates.
Right.
It was like, is it 6 plates? Is it 7 plates? Is it 8 plates? And of course, this was such a crappy gym that the bars were all bent. Like, you had to know how to position yourself under the bar to squat because the bar was so permanently deformed.
Dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just crazy. And now, as you said, I go into like crunch, which is where I lift weights when I'm in New York. And it's like, you don't see anybody really going above 2 or 3 plates typically. And look, they're still strong dudes, but what you're describing is a different world.
Looking back on it, I wish I knew more when I was doing it. Looking back on it, we tried to learn as much as we can as we were doing it. But along the way, I've gotten injured, and being hurt is worse. Like to me now, it sucks because I'm hurt. I can't fix it. So I got hurt from I tore my tricep just from pushing things too hard, pushing too much, too hard.
2-3 years ago, maybe, or what?
It was like 5 years ago,
and
it just never healed right. And it never. When I went to the doctor to see if I needed to get it reattached, it's like, it's torn, but it'll probably heal pretty good, and blah blah blah, and So I just didn't get it reattached, and also it was right before I went to rehab, so I wasn't in a good state of mind to go get it reattached and whatever, and it just never came back, and so. I wish I knew more, now. But what's nice about now coming back around is a lot of the things that are injured, I've been able to rehab and been able to, fix as well. So I'm still lifting pretty heavy, but I just wish we had that knowledge back then of not getting hurt.
So knowing what you know, and you guys have heard me talk about the importance of weight training. It's probably the only thing that for me is never compromised. My life sort of revolves around weight training. So I have to get in the gym 3 days a week, and my hotels when I'm on the road are planned around where those lifts are going to be and when and blah, blah, blah. And yet it doesn't mean that every week I can squat and deadlift and do all the things that matter, but almost without exception. So this stuff's important. But the other thing I'm sort of fond of saying is, look, rule number 1 is don't get hurt. So if someone's listening to this and either these numbers don't mean anything or whatever, but they still get the gist of it, which is, hey, I probably ought to be lifting weights. And let's say they're thinking, hey, I want to be able to squat and deadlift and bench, I want from each of you guys a really, sort of the most important thing that you know after all of your years of both watching, coaching, and experiencing that you would pass on to somebody. So let's start with you, Mark.
Yeah, the hard part is rule number 1 is to challenge yourself. Rule number 2 is to not hurt yourself. So that's where things get to be a little difficult. As we get older, a lot of times that shifts, right? But in the beginning, you need to get hurt. It sounds foolish to mention that, but we've all been hurt in the gym and we've all learned a lot from it. And I'm not saying that you should haphazardly jump in there and not warm up and stuff. But the truth is we could sit here and promote warm up and stretching and stuff and no one's still going to do it.
Well, but hang on, but let's talk about it. You guys are big on warming up the glute med. You've got, you sell a thing that one of the things I'm hoping you either have here or I'll have to buy it on the website, but I like your
the hip circle.
Your hip circle. So, I mean, that was one of the most important insights of my life was you can't squat or deadlift until your glute med, your TFL are working.
It's foolish to start a workout without warming up. You got to move around. If you're going to do any sort of upper body stuff, you got to get the elbow joint warm. You got to get the shoulders warm. And there doesn't have to be any science to it. There's not to be anything in particular to it. If you're going to squat, you throw on something like a hip circle, you walk forward, you walk backwards, you walk side to side. And maybe you do some sort of bending exercise where you're picking up barbell or plate, and just bending from the hips basically. But you have to warm up for your workouts. But if you're not challenging yourself, then you're missing out on a big piece of the puzzle because you're never going to get the results that you're looking for. People always think that when they look at other people on social media, when they look at Jeff Bezos, the guy that owns Amazon, or if they look at Elon Musk or they look at The Rock, people are like, man, that's so cool. Like, that would be awesome to be them. Like, must be easy. Like, must be easier because they're them, because they have that money, because they have that freedom. It is 10, 20, 30, 100, 1,000 times harder to be them. It gets to be harder and harder to be yourself as you continue to grow in fitness. And so that's the reason why you have to challenge yourself each and every day. You have to figure out a way. How can I be better than I was yesterday? Doesn't always mean that you have to do more weight, but you have to challenge yourself in something. There has to be progress. Without progress, I don't believe you can even have happiness. And so the progress is going to be very, very motivating to you as well. And it's going to be something that will help keep you on track.
Before I go to you, Chris, I want to follow up more on that. Talk to me about some of the ways that you would monitor progress when you're already at the level of the world's best, which you were. The days are long gone where there's a PR every day in the gym. You PR once a year, that's a good year. So what are you doing to motivate yourself day in and day out when you're still benching every week and still squatting and still deadlifting? Like, how are you finding out, what are these incremental goals?
As you chase one thing, something else starts to fall apart. And there'll be a tipping point. You want to be really strong? Well, maybe you run into an injury just because. Like, sometimes we're sitting there and trying to think about it. We're like, what? And, I don't know. Maybe your hips are tighter. Maybe and it's like, how about it's just you try to lift up 700 pounds and you've been doing it for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and that's just that. Like, that's just the way the body is going to be. So there's always something to work on. There's always something to improve. You always have that kind of white belt mentality where you're like, I don't know everything. I don't pretend to know everything. There's still so much to learn and expand upon. And when you look around, you're like, are there other people that are better than me in this lift? Are there other people that are stronger than me? Of course there is. Are there other people who've gone further than me? Of course there is. So that means I have a lot to work on. There's always a PR to chase. There's always something to chase. It might not be on that lift. It just might look like something different. One of the magical things that I've learned in the gym, and it's one of my favorite things, is just, and I share this with everybody, do you know a way to get a PR every single time you step foot into a gym?
Low standards, start low.
Well, that's my life right there. Yeah, I have low standards.
Yeah, right.
No, to try something you've never done before. What's your max set of 7 with incline dumbbell press? You have no clue, right? What's your max set of 3 sets of 7 with 1 minute rest on incline dumbbell press? You have no idea. Or machine, or like, you can get excited and you kind of make it anything, and you can start to kind of make it into a little bit of a game. And that's where it gets to be really fun. Oh yeah, last time I tried this, I think I only did 95 pounds. I'm going to try 100 pounds. I'm going to try 105 pounds. And at first, a lot of those things will go up and up and up and up. And after a while, they will dissipate. But you can always think of, well, maybe I'm going to try sets of 25 today just because I've never done it before.
Mm-hmm. So what about you, Chris? All the hard knocks you've learned, what's the advice for the person listening to this who like wants to get stronger and doesn't want to be intimidated when they walk in the weight room?
Yeah, the number one thing for me that really changed my life altogether is my diet. You know, like what I put in my mouth affected what I did in the gym. And I never saw that correlation when I was younger because I just ate like crazy and was a power lifter. But I can really see now that every competition that I won once I moved to California. So I explained to you before we were even on the podcast, I was telling you, when I moved to California in 1993, I met up with a group of power lifters. One of them was Mike O'Hearn. Another one was my friend Ron Fedko, who is a maniac. And so Ron Fedko was a power lifter. He was getting his degree in applied mathematics at UCLA, getting his PhD. And now he's the head of the computer science department at Stanford. This guy would bench press 526 with no bench shirt. He squatted 804, something like that, and deadlifted like close to 8, something like that at 198. And when he met me, he said to me, "You're too fat. You need to lose weight." Like one of the first things he said to me when I was like, "Hey,
he
I
always
want to."
said really weird stuff too, and you were like,
I said, "I want."
Remember, he told us about like the mitochondria and stuff. Remember?
Oh yeah, way back.
He's like, my red blood cells are way off. I should be able to press that for more reps. We were like, what?
Yeah, he's always like.
But he benched 225 for 64 reps. He was
Jeez.
Yeah, he was just a maniac. So anyway, he told
really
me
smart.
One of the first things he said was like, "You're just too fat to be a good power lifter." Like he just had no. He was rough around the edges. Yeah, he was rough around the edges. But he's like, but if you lost weight, you'd be pretty good. And I'm like, well, I have no idea how to like really lose weight. I've been trying to lose weight. That's why I'm in the gym. The entire time from the day I stepped in the gym, my goal was to lose weight. And I'd never been able to until I figured out this keto diet,
Were you talk about how you were chubby as a kid, Chris. Mark, were you chubby as a kid?
I was fat too.
I got fat around 13 and it continued to build because we didn't know anything about eating. Everything we ate was snack wells and granola bars,
Wait, is that bad?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Pretty bad.
I was a little bit more in the middle, I guess, but like, by around 16 years old, I was like 240 pounds, but I was like kind of big. I was kind of big and fat. And then, I started to learn more because he was picking up stuff, relaying information to me, and then I started to kind of slim down and get in better shape.
But when I met Ron in 93, and the very first thing he said was like, "Hey, go get a piece of paper and write down everything I said." So I ran and did it. I got the paper. I was all excited. I'm 23 years old and getting information from this great power lifter. And he just says red meat and water. And I write it down and I'm going, okay, and what else? That's it. That's your diet, red meat and water. I don't even want to see you chewing a stick of gum. And I was kind of scared of Ron. So, of course, I didn't even chew a stick of gum. And I went for like 2 or 3 weeks on no carbs, just literally ground beef. This is before grass-fed beef was even a thing. I don't even think you'd be able to find it if you had to. It was those big fat
those
tubes.
Cows went around back then.
Yeah, those big fat tubes of
yep, I know
the beef, the 5-pounders.
Disgusting.
And I would just cook
bones and
those
shit
up.
in there.
And I did that for a couple weeks and lost like over 20 pounds, won the powerlifting competition that I went into, and then continued to do that down to like 198 weight class in the next meet. After that, I'd started around 240 and got all the way down under 198.
And how much strength did you lose when you lost those 40 pounds? You actually got stronger.
Way stronger. Yeah, way stronger. And the thing is, because I lost weight, I was able to grab the bar now. I was able to squat better, right? I was able to get down to the bar. And so it was hard doing, like losing the weight and getting there. But once I got there, I stayed relatively strong. But my biggest problem was that for some reason, there wasn't any research on a keto diet back then. There wasn't any research at all on there was research, but I didn't know how to get to it, especially the internet wasn't even around, right. 1993, right? So barely around. What I did was I stopped doing it because I was afraid that the diet, I didn't know anything about it. I thought we needed carbohydrates. So for me, the biggest lesson I learned was that I should have never got off the original, keto/carnivore diet that worked really well for me. I'd gotten off of it for like 10 or 15 years until getting back on it more recently in the past 2 years. But I feel like those years in between were lost. I feel like I ruined them. I feel like because I wasn't optimizing my training along with my diet that I kind of wasted those years,
If someone said to you, hey, I want to learn how to squat, but I can't come to you in your gym, what do you point them to? I mean, I typically point people to videos that
YouTube?
Mark Ripito makes. Yeah, like who are you liking on YouTube? Do you have instructional stuff on there?
He's got a lot.
Yeah, I have over 3,000 videos on YouTube. So we have a whole media team, and we pump out a lot of information.
The most exciting thing is that he's got videos from Ed Cohn on there. Ed Cohn's the best squatter ever, and videos from Stan Efferding, strongest raw powerlifter ever,
One thing that Mark Ripito did really well is, and people will bash him because there's a lot of people that don't like the way that he squats, but really what he's trying to do is he's trying to show you a universal way to squat. And people are like,
and a very safe way to squat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Biomechanically.
Yeah, it is very safe. A lot of people will say, oh, he's leaning over way too much. Well, most people can't squat in an upright position. They just don't have the ankle mobility, the hamstring mobility. He's just trying to in a 5-minute segment, tell everyone how to squat. And that's, I think people lose sight of that.
Give people the benefit of the doubt.
CrossFit is a great place for people to start.
So that's interesting because there's some people that argue the opposite, right? Which is CrossFit tries to take relatively untrained people and get them to do Olympic lifting. And even when you look at Olympic lifters, they don't do that much Olympic lifting.
I'll say this. There has never in the history of the world has there been a better fitness program than what CrossFit puts out. Nobody spends more time and more money on what they put together. I know because I've been on the back end of it. I've seen what they do. I've seen what they do with their website. I've seen what they do with all the different things. I'm not even a CrossFit nut. I don't even care about CrossFit, really, to be honest with you. One thing I don't like that they do is the gymnastics element with adults is kind of a weird thing just because it's so hard to learn as you're older. But so what? It's a deeper and stronger challenge, right? But when you start to learn that they spend millions and millions of dollars, obviously they make millions and millions of dollars, but when they spend millions and millions of dollars setting up a fitness contest that has over 200,000 participants, and it narrows it down to the number one man and number one female in the world, I think that that's fucking awesome. And that's one of the coolest human studies that's going on. They also teach a lot about nutrition.
That's important.
When you go on the back end of their website, if you try to take one of those coaching courses, you will get absolutely slaughtered. I don't care how much you know about fitness. You'll get destroyed in that. It is so hard to try to figure out how to referee some of these things or how to even answer some of these questions that are on there. They have done an amazing job. And I know that they're reaching out to a lot of leading researchers when it comes to the nutrition aspect. I know they used to have Rob Wolf and they kind of have moved around a little bit. I'm not sure if you ever spoke with them, but I know some others that have. And they do a good job of investigating and poking around and finding the right thing. I'm not saying it's the answer for everybody, but if you are somebody that just has no clue on where to start, I'd recommend try a CrossFit box because they're everywhere. They're all over the place. Also understand that your first experience may not be great, just like if you went to a therapist or you went to a healthcare professional, they might suck, right? So what? Go and try another spot. Go and try somewhere else. You should typically find that they're very encouraging. The environment is very encouraging. They want you to exercise. They want you to get better. Their business model isn't that of a huge chain gym where they're like, we just want you to sign up for $20 and never see you again. So I think CrossFit offers a lot. Teaches people how to squat, teaches people how to deadlift. I do wish that they paid a little bit more attention to people trying to gain muscle, a little bit more bodybuilding stuff, but they keep evolving and they keep moving with the times.
Let's actually talk a little bit about that because you're in the process of doing exactly what you just described. You're training for a bodybuilding competition that's probably by the time this podcast come out, the bodybuilding competition will have already taken place because it's in a few weeks. But, I was saying before we started this, I think you and I, Chris, we were just playing patty cakes in the kitchen. And I was like,
hey now.
I was like, there are a few things I know less about than bodybuilding. Now, which isn't to say that growing up, I wasn't obsessed with it, right?
Yeah.
Like I freaking had every copy of every magazine. I had pictures of Lee Haney all over my wall. Obviously, I know every single line of Pumping Iron, including all the outtakes.
So you know enough.
No, I mean, I know that. But the point is, I don't know anything about how to make a person big. Like if someone came to me and said, Peter, I want to get jacked, what should I do? My answer would be, I have no clue. I don't know. I think it involves what you eat and how you lift, but that's about all I know. So to me, this is like a super interesting art. So what have you guys learned about this? And I want to specifically hear what you're doing.
First things first, I would say a lot of bodybuilders and a lot of people that are into bodybuilding get their start because they start lifting for football or baseball or boxing or whatever else they're doing. They start like lifting weights to get prepared for something else, and then they get bit by the bodybuilding bug. So I think powerlifting is a great place to start for most people, and I think it's where most people do start. Is sort of like I started benching for football, and then I started squatting, and then next thing you know, I was into bodybuilding. So I think like a great way to just dive in and get started is through some sort of lifting program that might aid something else that you're trying to do. That way, you're also killing two birds with one stone. You're getting better at what you're trying to do, and then who knows, this might be something that you enjoy and want to pursue. And
powerlifting to me is, I don't think I'd ever let my kids box. I feel fortunate that I got out of it alive, minus the IQ points I don't have. But I would love it if each of my kids at least spent some time powerlifting, because whatever you go to do later in life, you will have correctly learned the mechanics of the most important movements in the human body, which primarily come down to hip
There's a guy
tension.
down in your area, San Diego. Is his name Jeff Martin?
Oh yeah, Jeff.
CrossFit Kids.
Yeah.
Okay.
He started
He
that.
had to like dissolve the name of the
Yeah,
CrossFit
now
Kids,
it's called X Brand X something. But anyway, so yeah, his thing is awesome.
program.
He's got all these kids involved in powerlifting, right? So I went,
That's awesome.
Mark's company, Slingshot, they sent me down to San Diego with a camera and said, go film this powerlifting meet for kids. And it was all kids from like, I think ages like 7 or 8 up to like 15. And out of everything we've done on that channel, out of everything we did with Mark's YouTube channel, that was the most fun I've ever had. Just hanging out with kids that were like, between the ages of 8 and 15 and having them say, Mark Bell changed my life. He wasn't able to make it. He had like something else going on that day at the gym. But to go there and be able to interview those kids, and I would say, oh, I'm Mark's brother. They would get so excited that I was Mark's brother. It's like, no way. You know Mark? I'm like, yeah, he's my brother. Like, no way. You grew up with him? And to me, it's like the joy of seeing these kids get involved in powerlifting was just exciting.
I did a seminar there, and it was incredible to see the way these kids can move. I was like, oh my God. I was like really apprehensive about doing the seminar because I was like, what is that going to look like? I go to all these CrossFit boxes and I get asked to come in and teach a seminar on how to squat, bench, and deadlift. And it takes me hours and hours on end because it's very, very difficult to teach people how to squat.
Meaning to teach adults how to squat who are tight in the hips.
Who are, tight in the hips. Maybe they don't have a lot of experience lifting, or they just have bad experience lifting and they haven't learned enough yet. Getting with these kids was crazy, though. I was so shocked. Their form on everything was impeccable. I was like, holy shit. Because he runs a tight ship down there. He has the kids. The first thing that you see when you walk in is, first of all, it says, parents, please wait outside for your child. They don't allow the parents to hang out in there. If you want to come in and check the place out for a minute to make sure there's not a bunch of creepers around, you can. But they want you to drop your kid off there. And the second thing that you see is there's a room where kids go and they do their homework. And so it sends a message like, you're stopping here first. You're going to do your homework first. We're going to check in with you, make sure you got all your stuff done. Then we're going to go lift weights.
I have a feeling his kids are going to end up at this gym.
Well, it's interesting you bring this in.
In Ramona.
So when I remember when I saw my boy, so I have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, and then who are both boys, and then I got a 10-year-old girl, or almost 10-year-old, and the boy who's 4, because he still isn't in school, meaning he's only in whatever, like goof off school. He never sits in a chair.
Goof off school.
So anytime I watch him squat to pick something up, I go, oh, stop there! I got to get a picture.
Yeah,
because it's like
form is great.
The form is. It's ridiculous.
Heels are down, knees are open.
Oh my God.
Back's flat.
It's like he looks like a little Hercules.
Yeah.
And then conversely, my daughter, who used to be able to do that, now, she's just finished 4th grade. Her squat's worse than mine. Like her form is horrible when I say, Olivia, get down and squat for me.
That's something I look at all the time, and I say, how do we maintain that in our children? Like, I wish I could have maintained that, and I think that that's something that somebody needs to figure out.
Well, I think the answer is we're born with it. Is the first point.
Sure.
We are all born knowing how to hip hinge.
Exactly.
And I would argue that sitting is the thing that cripples us.
It's a big part of it.
And so how do you maintain it? Well, you can't eliminate sitting, but you can minimize it, right? So if every kid had a standing desk desk in school, for example, that's a step in the right direction because most of that sitting comes at school. And then secondly, it's like, how do you teach people the types of exercises to do?
There's people working on the standing desk thing. Our friend Kelly.and is leading that charge. Kelly and Juliet.and, leading the charge to have kids have stand-up desks, and they're doing programs where they're raising money to make that happen. Do you know Kelly.and, Mobility Wad?
I don't. No.
He's a CrossFit guy, and they've had great success. They find that kids do better in school when they stand too. So they've been
another big element of having children progress with some of those things rather than go backwards would be to simply have the physical education, have a little bit more emphasis than it does. It used to.
A real physical education.
And now you can't really do it anymore. Kids can't do pull-ups or push-ups or run a mile. And everyone should be able to do some version of that. I'm not saying everyone should be like super proficient at it, but when you start in kindergarten, you learn your ABCs, you start to learn some math, and as you keep progressing, your English progresses, your math progresses, you learn more stuff about history. Starts out with like George Washington, and you progress to learn more about American history and so on. But when it comes to the physical education, not much really changes. It's like it just is like playing, and then it goes into like a little bit more stuff, and then it just completely fizzles out. And now it's a lot of times not even in school anymore.
Yeah, we used to have that presidential physical fitness thing, right? And it actually was like a program that made sense, but then they just completely like discontinued that kind of stuff. And I think that like getting kids to be active, they're at school all day. And then like gym class is like nobody wants to get dressed for gym class, and nobody does anything.
A lot of times kids
just take
want
the kids
to
out take the kids out for a walk or something. I mean, I don't
throw
know
a
what
ball around with a kid, or kick a ball around with a kid. If they're 5, 6, 7,
I do this
they're
stuff
not going to turn that down.
With my daughter when she comes in the gym with me in the morning, because in San Diego I just work out at home, and one of the things I've got her doing, which is a competition, is how long can she dead hang in a chin-up. And she's, I forget what her record is now, but it's like, the first time she did it, she could only hold 17 seconds or something like that. And now she's like over 2 minutes dead hanging.
Really?
Yeah.
She's a savage.
That's pretty good.
And, she's light as a feather.
Yeah,
right?
but that's still pretty
amazing.
Cool.
Right. So now it's
I can't hang for 2 minutes. I die after 30 seconds.
The fact that she's getting an idea of what that's doing too.
Well, and the funny thing that I love about doing it is explaining to her the mental fitness. So that time she failed at 17 seconds, she just went from hanging to failing. And I was like, Olivia, I didn't even see you shaking. I didn't see you suffering. What the hell is going on here? Like, like, I don't think you understand the purpose of this exercise. You are trying to test the limit of what you're capable of. By definition, that is going to hurt. And the other thing is, this is funny. Maybe I was wrong.
That actually is interesting. A kid doesn't register.
Super healthy though too, because sometimes in competition, a kid may be more discouraged to swim next to the other kid next to them because they're like, I just think if I try harder, I'm not going to get any further ahead. Like the kid's still going to whoop my ass. In this, it's just her versus her, which is cool.
Yeah, and then I even, once she started to get the bug in her and she wanted to do it every day, she would go in and do it. And I was like, look, Olivia, you got to take a couple days off. Like, if you really want to hit this, you need to rest and recover a little bit, and we'll start planking and doing all these other things. So, I hope
Olivia,
we can maintain
you need your
it.
electrolytes, and we need to get you on some BCAAs.
Olivia, how many egg yolks have you had today?
Yeah. Olivia, if you really want to do this, we're going to push it. You're going to be the Olympic hanging champion.
So, Mark, your first experience with bodybuilding was when?
Now.
This is it. This is your first.
41 years old.
So I'm dying to know, like, can I not look like a pathetic guy? Like, what would I need to do if I wanted to be half as jacked as you?
Bodybuilding is amazing. You can make changes really, really rapidly, make changes really, really fast. For me, I'm very fortunate. I'm around a lot of people that have a lot of great information. And so I have the ability to have some accelerated success with the amount of people that are surrounding me in this effort. But the diet is interesting. The cardio is interesting. We're in a country that's so fat that there's like studies that show that cardiovascular training is bad for you. That shows that like it increases your estrogen and your cortisol so much you can't release fat. I mean, just some of these things it's really crazy to think that people are trying to even study something like that. When you look at bodybuilders for years have done these certain things very specific ways, and it works time and time again. It just continues to work every single time. Bodybuilders are partially responsible or probably largely responsible for ketogenic diet even sticking around in the first place, because they will always introduce some form of low carbohydrate living. That's how I learned about it many years ago. But the discipline to do all the things that you don't want to do when you normally don't want to do them is really, really powerful. Stopping yourself from eating extra. Jay Cutler came into our gym recently. He's 4-time Mr. Olympia, and he said on a podcast that he...
Can you explain to people what the difference is between Mr. Olympia and any other bodybuilding contest?
Yeah, the Mr. Olympia contest is the biggest one.
It's the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
right?
that's what Arnold...
That's what Arnold Schwarzenegger was 7 times.
That's what he was famous for, Dorian Yates and those guys. So, this isn't just some schmuck. This is
the
top
world's
guy in the
best bodybuilder for 4 years.
Yeah. He said he ate 7 times a day. And I just sat there and went, wow. That's a lot of dedication to eat 7 times a day. It means, all your meals are prepped and everything. And he said he ate the same food at the same time every single day. He did his cardio at the same time. He did his weightlifting at the same time. He would go tanning at the same time. He would get in a hot tub, get a massage, and so on, and go to sleep. All these things were regimented out, so that way he never skipped a beat, and that way he could be precise, and that way he could be the best. As he was talking about all these things, I kept kind of dwelling on that 7 meal thing, because I've tinkered with some intermittent fasting, and I've teetered with some different things, but I was fixated on that. I'm like, as I got into this bodybuilding stuff, I started asking some other guys, I'm like, well, can you do this? And can you do that? They're like, no. I'm like, well, I can have I'm supposed to have 150 carbs a day, 65 grams of fat, 350 grams of protein. I'm like, can I just have 100 grams of protein in one shot and have a big steak meal? They're like, no. And I'm like trying to figure out all these loopholes. They're like, there's no loopholes. This is the way it's got to be. It's 50 grams of protein at every meal for 7 meals. That's 350 grams of protein. That's what you're supposed to do. And so I finally got it through my fat head that that's what I'm supposed to do. But these things are lined up in a very specific manner. Now, when I went and started to try to look and poke around and figure out how many times a day the average person eats, it was 15 times a day.
Because there's so much snacking.
Because there's so much snacking. And I just never even thought about it. But I'm like, I'm on a diet all the time. I'm always trying to lose weight. And boy, do I sabotage the fuck out of myself. Because I do that all the time. I'll grab, and it's stuff that's, within this reasonable, healthy
sure. It's a handful of almonds or whatever it is.
Oh, a cheese stick. And you think you're so hungry and you think you need it to recover and you think you need it to be jacked, but you just don't. You can actually handle eating a lot less than you're currently eating is one thing to know. And you can actually handle a lot more training. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that you just get in this crazy mode of overtraining and develop, body dysmorphia and all these things. But I do think you could probably push yourself a lot further than currently. And if you go from not implementing bodybuilding stuff to implementing bodybuilding stuff, it makes a huge difference. I know you've been on Joe Rogan's podcast. We've been fortunate enough to be on his podcast as well. He's the perfect example. You take somebody like that, already has a good structure, or yourself, and you mentioned kettlebell training, and you mentioned some different things. You were speaking with Daniel Rego and telling him some of the things that you've been doing. I know, and Daniel knows because we train with Michael Hearn, that if you implemented some bodybuilding stuff, or not even some bodybuilding stuff, if you just embraced bodybuilding, period, you'd be able to look so much different 4 weeks from right now.
So give me an example, like a practical example.
And I'm probably up your protein too. That's usually one. I don't know what it is now, so I can't really say that. But
right now I'm in ketosis, so my protein's pretty low. It's probably about 100 grams a day.
Yeah, you probably want more like 1.7. So the science that I've heard, 1.7 grams per kilogram of body weight will elicit muscle growth, right? So we need at least that much. For me, it's 135 grams. So I think it's just like finding that number, sticking to that number, and like Mark said, incorporating some bodybuilding stuff. For me, the changes with extra protein happened immediately, and like he'll tell you, it just changed. It was like one day I was skinny fat, and next day I was muscular, and it was kind of like that by just flipping.
Is this rule of 50 grams per meal times the 7 meals? I mean, presumably that's because amino acids have a relatively short residence, and you've got to kind of keep the exposure to those things high for a longer period of time,
right?
To at least get the hypertrophy, right?
Right, and that's specifically for me. That's for my body weight. That's for the energy expenditure. That's for my age with a general understanding of
so what do you
what
weigh,
I can do in the gym.
I mean, maybe taking a step back because I don't know.
I weigh
enough
230
about this.
pounds.
But you're getting close to competition. So as you want to show up at the competition weighing what? You personally?
I'm just going to kind of end up where I end up, but I would imagine it would be another 10. There'd probably be another 8 to 10 pounds of actual weight lost before now and then. And there'll probably be another 5 to 10 pounds of water weight that's dropped. I don't really know what they have in store for me, but I guess
estimate your body fat percent will be on the day of
competition. I don't have any idea, but I think I'll probably weigh about 215 pounds or 210 pounds. I think actually really the lower that I weigh, I feel like the bigger that I'll probably look without getting out of hand with that. Because then I'll start
and
to
at
look
the
small.
peak of your building phase, before you began this taper, how much did you weigh?
I didn't have one because I was just kind of.
You just came straight out of powerlifting, and
I just kind of got shoved into it because I was dropping some weight, but I was probably about 240, 245. So that's what I'm talking about. Is the difference has only been about 10 pounds, but it's crazy because like even just on my YouTube channel, we posted a video a few days ago, but it's from about 2-3 weeks ago when I started all this, and it's me working on some posing. I just flat out look fat, compared to now. Obviously wasn't fat, but it just flat out look fat.
Yeah, Mark is, like you said, he's in a position where he can talk to some of the best people in the world about training, diet, and nutrition. And what he was doing was a podcast with Hani Rambad, who is the nutritionist for Phil Heath, who's a 7-time.
Did Phil win last year?
Yeah.
So he's now won 7 consecutive.
7.
Yeah, he's going for 8.
And how many did Ronnie Coleman win?
8.
That's the most.
Have you seen Ronnie Coleman's documentary?
I know that it
I
exists.
feel like I should mention that because it was a really great
Lee Haney
story. Really
well.
great.
I thought Lee won 7. Oh, did Lee win 8? You're right. 84 to 91, and then Yates won like 6.
Mm-hmm.
Or
so both those guys won 8. Yeah.
So Mark's working with
Yates
Hani
won.
Rambad, who's helping him do his diet and stuff, which I think is amazing to be able to have access to like the top people in the world. And he was working the other day with Charles Glass doing posing, and Charles is known as the godfather of bodybuilding. He's at Gold's Gym every day. He trained Dexter Jackson for the 2008 Mr. Olympia contest, as well as like a ton of other
Michael Hearn's an
pros.
amazing person too.
Hearn's been helping us both a lot.
You hear different things about the guy, but he trains at 4:00 in the morning. He wakes up at about 2:30. He eats at 3. He makes sure he gets his ass to the gym. When he gets to the gym, he's not full of like motivational talk or anything like that. But a lot of times, one of his first questions will be, "What'd you eat this morning?" And if somebody says they didn't eat anything, he doesn't even really say anything. He just kind of like walks off. But he's just it's almost like, oh, I guess you're not all in. I guess you're not as into this as I thought, because this is the method that we're going to use.
So the nutrition is clearly important, and I mean, if there's one thing that's clear in everything you're saying, it's just how empirically wise this sport is, right?
I can't even eat at a restaurant because I can't afford to have any oil, or I can't have a day where I have 120 grams of fat. I'm supposed to have 65 grams of fat in a day. And if for some reason something was off and I had 70 or 80, it wouldn't be the end of the world, but I'm supposed to be within this range.
By percentage of macro, what percentage of your calories are protein, fat, carbohydrate right now?
I don't really know that. Daniel would have to run the math over there, but
Daniel, can you run those numbers for us, man?
350 in protein, 65 grams of fat, and 150 grams of carbohydrates. Sometimes the carbohydrates are up a little bit from there, but the fats are 65.
And you said the carbs 135?
150.
That's some math going on now.
But, it's like I said, it's very specific. And carbohydrates, just to try to clear everything up for people that are listening, because I know you're a keto proponent and we love the ketogenic diet. Ketogenic diet has always worked really well for me because it's allowed me to keep control over the amount of food that I eat. It's one of the few things that has burned off my hunger. It's one of the few things that have burned off my cravings. It's the only thing that has ever done that before.
Where in the bodybuilding cycle?
Tell us what
hang on one second.
2,600 calories. What's the percentages? The macros. We're getting some information from Daniel Arago off screen here for those that are interested. Oh yeah. What's Peter wanted to know the macros for
The fat's probably,
what
I'm going to guess
percentage of
15.
it. So it's 2,600 calories, is what you're saying? Not a whole lot of calories.
But one thing on that is I don't feel deprived at all. I feel like I'm eating, because I'm eating every 2.5, 3 hours. And everyone keeps talking about how brutal it is, how hard it is. And I know that it'll get worse because you do start to calorie restrict. And everyone says like the last 2 weeks kind of feel like a zombie, but I've been feeling really good. And as I mentioned earlier, the progress is the motivation. Because every day I see something new or different on me, and I'm like, wow, I just didn't even have any idea I could do any of this. I've tore both my biceps. I tore my pec 3 times. I tore my hamstring. I've torn a bunch of stuff, and I never tried to consider to really bodybuild because I was like, man, if I dieted down, I'd look weird because I've torn all this shit off my body.
People kept asking him for years, when are you going to do a show? You should get, you're getting lean.
I kind of thought I was done. I was done powerlifting. I didn't have a lot of direction and wasn't sure what I was going to do next. And so this challenge came, it came at a perfect time. And
the challenge came from a podcast with Hani, right?
Yeah.
He was like, he was on his podcast and he said, well, why don't you do a show? You look great.
Well, he said it even more than that. He was like, I signed you up for one.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you're doing it.
Yeah.
So
he said you owe it to your
where
fans.
does the ketogenic diet make sense for the bodybuilder? What phase of, is it when they're trying to get leaner?
Yeah.
I see.
So for some of the like pro bodybuilder guys, the ketogenic diet probably doesn't play into anything they really want to mess around with unless they've been destructive for a while with their behavior. Like if they've gone way off the rails and eaten, but a pro doesn't do that. Professional bodybuilder, somebody who's being serious, who's trying to win money at these shows, they would not be somebody that would be doing that. So they wouldn't even need to utilize a ketogenic diet. Where a ketogenic diet would play into, where it would really help even somebody like myself, former fat kid, is it will help me to kind of continue to tighten up, and it will also give me some mental freedom. I think one of the worst things you can ever do, whether it's business or any aspect of your life, lifting, is get stuck in one thing, because a lot of times you're focused in on that one thing and you can't see anything else. And so if you were always just doing a bodybuilding diet, and if you were always utilizing cardio for 45 minutes every day, all these things would become less effective. So where the ketogenic diet can come in, you could utilize the ketogenic diet to become technically, it works out pretty good on paper, but I don't know how it works in theory, would be you could become more sensitive to carbohydrates by dumping in a ketogenic diet at certain points and changing up the style of exercise that you do for a while.
The bodybuilding competitions, obviously Olympia is not a drug-regulated competition, correct?
Yeah.
So you can't compete at that level without lots of drugs.
Right.
What about at the level outside of Olympia? So like this competition you're doing, is it considered a drug-free competition?
I don't even know much about. I've never even been to a bodybuilding show. So this is all very new to me. I've only caught the tail end of a bodybuilding show at the Arnold Classic, where I went to go see Brian Shaw, and some of the bodybuilding stuff was finishing up, and it was impressive. I mean, it was pretty crazy to see those guys, because they're some of the best.
That's effectively the Olympic level. That's Olympia level bodybuilding.
You got Dexter Jackson up there, who's 51 or 52 years old. I mean, there's some real savages there, but. Yeah, I don't even know. Like, I know the posing. I've been working on that, but I don't know like the categories, and I barely know.
So for this
exactly
competition, are you using anabolic steroids or diuretics or any of the other sort of aids that one would use?
As in Bigger, Stronger, Faster. I talked about utilizing them from the time I was 25. I've been using them. I say in the movie, I'm gonna probably be on and off them the rest of my life, and that's what I believe. It's direction I chose. When you choose a certain thing and you like the result of it, like, I don't feel like there's any reason to go back. And for me, for now as well, I get it prescribed, which is kind of an added bonus to making sure that it's like, I guess, more on the up and up. But to me, it doesn't really make any difference whether you grab it from some dude at the gym or whether you get it from a doctor. I actually think that they're not going to be all that regulated anyway. No matter how you slice it, but
what are I don't know anything about how bodybuilders use steroids. What are the
clean body mass is the main thing. So people get confused about what they actually do. People get confused about what steroids do. I think People think that steroids automatically make you strong, and they don't necessarily automatically make you strong. What they do in most cases is they allow people to gain more weight. Now, there's some cases where people don't gain a whole lot of weight and they do gain strength. But if you don't continue to gain weight, at some point that strength will only level up so much. So when you introduce steroids don't multiply on top of themselves. They only work to a certain level. So you're on level 1 with your lifting, and you progress, and your genetics and everything allow you to get to level 4. You take steroids, and maybe over a period of time you get to like level 6, but you're still not going to be able to get to level 8, 9, or 10, where these guys like Jay Cutler and some of these mammoth people are, because of their genetics, because of their environment as children, because of X, Y, and Z. You're probably just never going to be able to level up to their potential. But
which is an important distinction, because I think a lot of people
your starting point, as we
a
lot
of people look at, let's just pick Phil Heath because he's the best in the world today, and
they're just going to think it's all drugs.
It's all drugs, but I don't think people understand. Like, I could inject a human being with every anabolic steroid. Period. Like, let's get the world's supply of anabolic steroids and inject it into me.
Yeah,
I couldn't look 1/10 of what that guy looks like.
Right. And the best coaching and the best whatever.
People like to make things easy and simplify it, and they can't come close to Phil Heath. They can't even, come close, even with a ton of drugs. So they just want to say, "Oh, it's just steroids." It's not. It's not like, "Oh, this guy works harder. This guy's better." And I do think that steroids cloud the sport. I do think that if there was a way to get steroids out of the sport, that it could be more popular across the mainstream. However,
well, it's part of the reason why it has become more popular, because they do have like men's physique, and they got some of these different categories now where you're seeing more men and women.
It's gone more more mainstream with some of that stuff.
There's classic physique. The body types don't look as crazy, right?
Yeah, now there's a category called classic physique. And it's interesting because, like, in the very first year of classic physique, my friend Danny Hester, he won Mr. Olympia classic physique. He's about 190 pounds. He looks awesome. He always looks awesome. He's about my height, 190, jacked, shredded, looks amazing. And then the next year, the guy that wins, it's like 240. You know what I mean? You're like, this is not classic physique so anymore. Classic. Like what happened to the little guys that were in great shape, And the guy that won looked amazing, but it's a different look than the bigger bodybuilders, but it's not it's not yet a natural thing. It's not like one guy's natural and one guy's on. It's like they're just on different levels, right?
Yeah, so classic doesn't mean drug-free. It means you're trying to produce a phenotype that is...
You're trying to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger is like, what's funny is like now they have a category. Arnold Schwarzenegger was Mr. Olympia 7 times. He was considered in the Guinness Book of World Record the greatest male physique, which is just a title they gave him.
He couldn't win a California bodybuilding
That's what I'm saying. He can't win anymore. Like if you look like Arnold, you'd win classic physique now.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy.
So who's your favorite 70s, 80s bodybuilder? Frank Zane?
Mike Menser.
Mike Menser.
Yeah, and Arnold. Arnold's a really big influence.
Huge fan of Dorian Yates too. We Blood and Guts. A lot of that was Mike. Well,
he was later, right? Yeah. 90s.
Oh yeah.
And Menser and Yates actually have quite a bit in common philosophically.
Well, they trained together too. And I trained with Mike Menser when I first came out here. When I moved out here in '93, like you see people at the gym. And you're a meathead. First thing I did was like, I'm training with Mike Menser. I don't care. He blew out my knee because he had me do these crazy squats on the squat machine, and it messed up my knee for like 6 months. But I still had got to train with him, which was cool. But at the time I got to train with him, I showed up at the gym, and he was outside smoking a cigarette, and he was all fat. And it was just like, this is Mike Menser now. This is what he is, And it's like, a lot of times in life, especially me, I've met all my heroes, and pretty much everybody's let me down. So it's just the way life is, I guess.
Have you ever met a hero where they exceeded your expectation?
I don't know. Let me see. Have we?
Yeah, we have many times.
I'm sure we have.
Ed Cohn.
Ed Cohn.
Jay Cutler.
Stone Cold Steve Austin's one of my favorite people in the entire world.
He's amazing.
He's so intelligent.
Joe Rogan's fucking
He's
cool.
so well researched. Like he's just awesome to be around. Like there's people like that, I think, where
Jay Cutler was like
The Rock.
The
Rock is an amazing dude. Like when you meet The Rock, you're like, well, it's all probably just an act. But The Rock will look you in the eye, shake your hand, and say, "How's your mom doing?" Like, and he means it, and you could feel that he means it, and that's important, especially when you're that big of a celebrity and stuff like that.
One of the things I struggle with, and I was actually talking about this a little bit when I was on Joe Rogan's show. I've been pretty vocal and open about my view that once I really spent like 5 years learning everything there was to learn about anabolic steroids, I came to the conclusion that, well, I can't speak to what happens in bodybuilding because I think that takes it to a different level, but certainly within the level of how they're used in cycling or, more physiologic levels of use, I can't see any evidence of harm. Now, EPO is different. You can certainly take too much EPO and cause problems, but once you start talking about testosterone, stanozolol, oxandrolone, these drugs that are typically used in sports, again, I was having a very hard case.
I'll show you right here, my tricep that's torn. I was bench pressing 455. After it, my triceps hurt a little bit. They were sore. And then I popped my tricep. I've never been hurt lifting in my entire life. At the time, I was on a ton of juice.
So your argument would be that you just didn't have the tendon strength to necessarily.
And I attribute that to steroid use, for sure, 100%. So to say that there's no ill effects of them or no side effects or no.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking more of the cardiometabolic stuff.
Yeah, liver, kidney, cardio, no. But can you injure yourself? Joey Diaz, one of my favorite people in the world, he's hilarious. He's like, you see these guys in the gym and they're like 50 years old and they used to take steroids and now they're just like a bag of shit. It's like, I kind of agree with that statement too, that there are a lot of people that have taken steroids and abused them and gotten really crappy skin and crappy, things that don't look good, not necessarily aesthetic and probably not healthy. I'm sure that they've driven a lot of people's blood in a bad direction, which could lead to other things possibly, right? But not definitely. So I think that's where we're looking at like the detrimental effects of steroids would be among the users that are losers, if that makes sense. It's among the users that aren't paying attention to everything else. And
I guess under medical supervision though, when you're again doing these things within physiologic doses, which is pretty different than what the average person is doing.
Well, we're talking like something that a doctor would prescribe, like a 200 milligrams.
It's like for example, you take somebody whose testosterone is like 2 standard deviations below the mean, and you revert them back to the mean or median level of testosterone.
If we're going in that respect, I would have to go back and say that you're 100% right. I haven't seen anything like even a muscle tear on a normal dose. But I was using pretty good doses.
How much were you taking?
Well, at the time I was using trenbolone and I was using testosterone together, and then I was taking some other oral stuff. It was like right after I got out of rehab. I'm like, I got to get jacked, and it's funny because they tell you in AA that if you're on steroids, it affects you from the neck up, and you're not allowed to take them. So people got on my case about.
And how much testosterone were you taking?
Just 200 milligrams a week. I've always stuck to the 200 milligrams. I never really went above that because I never wanted to get like puffy,
Which is interesting because I don't think if I've ever replaced a person's testosterone, which I've done many times exogenously for patients who are low, I've never had a patient that high. And,
really?
And 200 is not high from a performance standpoint.
Yeah.
I've seen guys show up.
What is it usually, 100?
If I'm going to start a patient, again, it's much more complicated. I need to know their sex hormone binding globulin, their estrogen, their free testosterone is really what we're trying to fix. But very unusual that I would ever start a patient anything more than 50 milligrams twice a week.
It's interesting because everybody I know is on the same, goes to the same doctor, has the same dose. So it's just a thing.
Well, and again, it's a very different thing we're out trying to optimize for. I mean, my interest in replacing testosterone is resolving insulin resistance, preserving muscle mass. Right. Like it's a bunch of other things.
It's interesting that you say that, and it actually gives me a lot more confidence in talking to somebody like you. It's like, I just know almost everybody that's on testosterone, they all take 200 milligrams. Like,
I don't think I think I might only.
I'm on 200 milligrams.
I think I've once had a patient take 100 twice a week.
So I think it's
pretty high.
I think when you're saying it, it's like, oh wow, you actually don't give everybody the same dose. That's
well, first of all, I don't even like to. I mean, most patients that I need to replace testosterone in, which is still a minority of patients, I'm not using testosterone. Right. My first goal is, can you get them to endogenously make testosterone? So, the way I have a...
And what are you utilizing to do that?
Yeah, so I start with the final thing I care about is free testosterone. So if free testosterone is low, and I define low as somewhere between 1 and 2 standard deviations below the mean of our reference range in the lab, and symptomatic. So you have to have these 2 things in my opinion. So if the number's low, but I see no evidence of symptom, meaning they're not having a difficult time maintaining muscle mass, they don't have too much adipose tissue, they're not insulin resistant, libido's fine, all of these things, then I don't believe in fixing the number. But let's assume you have someone who's symptomatic and who's low. So free testosterone is low. The next question is free testosterone low because testosterone is low or because sex hormone binding globulin is high? because free testosterone, which is what matters, is proportional to testosterone and inversely proportional to sex hormone binding globulin. So once you answer that question, if sex hormone binding globulin is too high, you have to investigate why. And there are really only 4 reasons for it: insulin, thyroid hormone, estrogen, and genetics. So you do your investigation, you figure out what's going on. If testosterone is too low, the next question is it too low because you're siphoning too much of your testosterone into either dihydrotestosterone, DHT, or estradiol? Yes or no? If yes, you can block both of those, right? You have 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, you have aromatase inhibitors. If it's low, not because you're siphoning too much away, then the question is, are you not producing enough? And if you aren't producing enough, are you not producing enough because you don't have enough DHEA, which is a substrate? Or do you not have the pituitary signal? Is your FSH and LH too low? So there are actually 9 steps in understanding someone's testosterone and free testosterone level, and we can actually impact every single one of those steps pharmacologically if we're trying to put this in service.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a much different approach when you're doing it for medical management.
This kind of blows my mind too, because I'm going like, wow, there's now. So this is like, you learn something new every day. It's like I'm just used to people taking 200 milligrams of testosterone. Now you just turn me on to 9 different ways that I can increase things. It's like,
right. You can give a person LH.
Crazy.
You can give them something that stimulates LH or FSH production. So there's a pre-hormone that's a synthetic hormone that mimics basically an estrogen molecule at the hypothalamus that then tells the pituitary to make more FSH and LH. That, in many ways, is
and now you're putting this into practice clinically, and you're seeing awesome results with it.
Yeah,
like
and this is funny. This is one of
results.
those things that we learned sort of from people who were doing this, but it's now actually become, I would hesitate to say mainstream because I don't think people are fully mainstream in understanding this, but now you're seeing this stuff published in medical literature that says, hey, there are really reasonable, safe ways to increase a person's testosterone without even giving them testosterone.
Well, you can also start
I'd be
with
more interested in that. I think
well,
it sounds
even
awesome.
without supplementation, right? There could be certain foods, right? There could be certain foods to avoid. Maybe somebody doesn't have a sound diet. A sound diet has to throw you off.
To me, the first step in evaluating a male for hypogonadism, which is just the technical term for low testosterone, especially if so this is a not uncommon finding. The guy has low free testosterone, but his estradiol is not too high, his sex hormone binding globulin is not too high, his DHT is not too high, his DHEA is not too low. He's not making enough testosterone. But his FSH and LH are also low. So what does this mean in English? This means this guy's brain isn't making the signal to tell his body to make more testosterone, despite the fact that his testosterone is low. So that tells you where the problem is. The problem is in the brain. And the number one diagnosis for that is sleep deprivation. So when I finished residency, I didn't measure free testosterone. I only knew my total testosterone, but it was 220. That was on a scale where 2 standard deviations below the mean was 350.
Yeah.
2 standard deviations above the mean was 1200. And I'm 220.
Yeah, after my hip replacement, I was 49. That's when I got on it.
Yeah, 49. Most women have a higher testosterone.
My doctor just said, I don't know how you get out of bed. I'm like, I don't know. I just do. Yeah.
So in my case, my testosterone went from 220 to about 650 by just sleeping. Once I went from not sleeping 4 hours a night, boom, that improved.
Oh, and a lot of Americans are not sleeping because they're obese, because they're heavy. So if they could figure out a way to get momentum, get the diet straightened out, get the sleep a little bit better, they could start heading in the right direction too.
Yeah, and the other thing is cortisol. So if you have hypercortisolemia, that is going to negatively impact testosterone production directly and indirectly.
What is hypercortisol?
High levels of cortisol.
That's all it is?
Yeah. In medicine, we have to come up with fancy ways to say things
Sure.
because it makes us feel smarter. So if you have too much cortisol, one, you have a shunt, right? You have something called a pregnenolone shunt or steal, where you start to steal precursors of testosterone to make more cortisol. So that's depleting you of substrate to make this. But I think perhaps the more sinister issue is these high levels of cortisol impair you from entering what's called delta wave sleep, which is where you make the FSH and LH to make the testosterone. You only make this stuff when you're sleeping.
What about, there's a lot of doctors that are prescribing stuff to people, and they'll prescribe some of these cholesterol, medications.
Statins.
These statins, yeah, they're probably damaging, right? Some of these things are probably damaging towards just the natural male testosterone and even with the females and stuff. Aren't these things kind of
Yeah, I mean, it's actually
plaguing us a little bit too.
In theory, you could make an argument that says if you take a statin, which is inhibiting cholesterol synthesis, and given that you need cholesterol to make sex hormones, that should be depleting them. But we don't actually see that in the data. So even though
really?
No, you don't actually see that. Now, that doesn't mean that at extreme levels it won't show up.
I think I've been saying that for years. Well, like it blocks your cholesterol, and then that's what makes your hormones.
Yeah, it turns out that's probably overly simplistic. The body's more complicated and more rigorous than we give it credit for. So the body will prioritize its use of cholesterol for two things above all else, which is forming cellular membranes, because cholesterol is what gives a cell its fluidity, membrane fluidity, and then hormone production. So particularly glucocorticoids and sex hormones. So does that mean that you couldn't statinize a person into the next millennium, end up suppressing? No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
You probably could. But I think at the levels that most people are taking them, the evidence would not actually suggest that we're inhibiting endogenous testosterone production.
And I think like with what I do, I was made the movie Prescription Thugs, and then all of a sudden I'm like, statins are bad, like stay away, right? And then I listened to you talk, and you had a really intelligent conversation with Dr.
Ron
Krauss, right? And the guys are all talking about statins the whole time, like, wait a second, these guys don't know that they're bad? And I'm like, well, these are the guys that actually know what they're talking about. They treat people every day. And so it kind of opened my mind back up to statins. So I think like a lot of times when we're doing research or we're trying to find out the truth or whatever, like I was like, oh, statins are all bad. And I just think all one way. And I'm trying to not think that way about things, like where I'm thinking nothing's all bad, nothing's all good. Really.
And that's kind of the way to bring this thing full circle as we probably wrap up so we can let you guys get back to your day. At the outset, I said you kind of, in many ways, opened my eyes to revisiting something that I just assumed was dogma. Steroids are bad. If you have 1 milligram of testosterone cypionate injected into a human being, you will kill them. That was my view. And then I come away from Bigger, Stronger, Faster, and I'm like, maybe I got to rethink this.
Yeah.
Now, it's not to say I have any understanding or expertise of how steroids are used in bodybuilding or things like that, where I suspect they can still be harmful if abused. But certainly within, medical physiologic
where is it
levels,
relative to your life and to your patients?
I honestly believe that anabolic steroids, when used at physiologic levels, are safer than Tylenol.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are far less toxic and frankly, far less likely to lead into morbidity. And so similarly, maybe you'll leave this discussion thinking, okay, maybe it's not statins are all bad. Maybe the idea is they got to have a time and a place.
The overall overarching thing I've learned from making this movie about nutrition that Mark and I are working on right now is that nothing is all good and nothing is all bad. And Mark has been really illustrating that to me as we go through. He goes, see, carbs are all bad, right? See, they're all bad. And it's like, well, no, now I can see how you can use them as a tool, right? And then statins are all bad. No, now we can see how we can use them as a tool and we can keep people alive longer. And certain people, you might need this tool only for a couple weeks to get you to this point, and then you can get off of it or whatever. Like it's allowed me to think more openly about everything that we put in our bodies and everything that we do to try to be better.
Yeah, that when we were inhaling some food before this and you shared your salmon with me, which was fantastic, by the way, especially with that Himalayan sea salt. That was damn good.
I can't take credit.
He traveled all the way to the Himalayas for that.
Yeah, the wifey cooked that up too, so I can't
that was
take
wonderful.
credit.
But that was a great example of, I mean, again, I know you're in the midst of a bodybuilding competition prep, but it was beautiful to just see how regimented. It's like, I'm going to have this many grams of salmon, I'm going to have this many Japanese sweet potatoes, and it's like, you know what? In this moment, these molecules are the tool I need. Yeah. And I think that's the takeaway to me is a statin, a carbohydrate, a whatever, it's a tool. And the key to me, if you want to be a great carpenter in life, which I think should be all of us should want to be the best carpenters in life, is have the most tools, know how to use each tool, and know when to use each tool. And when I have patients say to me, doctor, I am morally against fill in the blank. I am morally against statins. I am morally against supplements. I am morally against XYZ. I say, okay, I'll never force you or try to talk you into doing anything. But that's sort of like a contractor coming to my house to rebuild it and me saying, I just don't want you using the Phillips screwdriver or the saw. You can do anything else, but don't use those two. That's strike. Can he still build the house? Of course. But I've just taken away two tools. And
made it a lot harder.
And in the hands of a good carpenter, that seems like a bad idea. So you guys have opened my mind up to a set of tools known as steroids. And
you opened our minds up.
Well, very well.
Open your mind.
Guys, so tell me when's the doc going to come out?
So we don't know. I mean, the one question I should just say, a lot of people ask us, when's it going to come out? And they also ask us like exactly what it's going to be about or what we're trying to say. And I can tell you, I don't know either answer at all. I have no idea. So every film that I do is a journey. I never know when it's going to end. It makes a lot of people that work with me mad. And I just say, well, like, that's just how I do it. Like if you go, okay, we're going to make this movie, we're going to film for 6 months, and then we're going to edit for 3 months, and then we're done. And you can do that. That's like a way to do it. But I feel that, for example, Mark and I started this movie. He had no idea he was going to do a bodybuilding show. So, but that's got to be in the movie. That's awesome. That's like a really cool thing that's actually happening. So what if I just decided, like in the beginning of the movie, when we first started filming, I decided I only wanted to film this. Then we wouldn't have this whole bodybuilding thing, which could end up being what adds a layer to it that makes it connect all the dots for people.
Totally makes it more nuanced.
Or whatever, right? So we don't really know, but I would say that in general, we're planning on it just coming out next year because we're not worried about it for this year. And we're just planning on making the best thing that we can. And so we like to encourage everybody. Like people send me a lot of information and people give me a lot of tips, and I'm open to all of it. I listen and read all my comments and everything because I'm open to whatever is going to make the best film. I'm not trying to set out to make one specific thing.
So between when this comes out and when this film comes out, what is the best way for people to reach you, Chris?
They can just find me on Instagram at Big Strong Fast. That's kind of the one thing that I check all the time. So
okay. And what about you, Mark?
Twitter too.
You can't get a hold of me because I've got too much shit to do. But one thing I want to encourage everybody to do is really simple because nobody ever knows where to start. And we don't get a lot of answers because people that are smart don't give you definitive answers because that's just the way it goes. Just try to start walking. You know, almost all of us are lucky enough to have the ability to put one foot in front of the other. Try to go for a 10-minute walk every day. Talk to your son, your daughter, your mom, your dad, if they live close by or if you can get a second with them. Do it after lunch. Do it after dinner. Preferably, it'd be great if you can do it more than once a day. But it's just a great place to start, a great way to clear your mind. There's a lot of shit going on nowadays. If you have an hour and a half or whatever it might be to be on Instagram all day, you certainly can carve out 10 minutes for yourself every day to go on a walk. Really, really simple, easy thing to do.
And because people aren't going to be able to reach out to you directly, they want to be able to take advantage of the amazing stuff you've already done. What's your YouTube channel?
Yeah, it's the YouTube channel is Super Training 06. You can also check out my Instagram, which is at Mark Smelly Bell. And you can also check out my website, which has all my products, the Slingshot, the Hip Circle, some of the stuff you've seen, which is markbellslingshot.com.
Right.
And I also have my own
podcast
as well.
One thing that we haven't talked about, but it'll leave it up to people to go watch it, is my new film, A Leaf of Faith, which is about Kratom.
That's right. We didn't even get to that.
Well, we didn't really get to it, but I'll explain it really quick. Kratom is a plant that comes from Southeast Asia that a lot of people are using to get off of opioids, and they're also using it just to feel better. Like for me, every day I use it as a pre-workout. It just makes me feel great before I get in the gym. I've gotten a lot stronger because of it. I've gotten in better shape because I can focus better. So A Leaf of Faith is available on iTunes. It's available on Google Play, YouTube, and Amazon right now.
It's not on Netflix yet?
To rent. It's on Netflix on August 27th, and then when it comes out August 27th, I think that's going to be sort of the real launching point for it, because with all my movies, I put them on iTunes and they go around. When it gets to Netflix, that's when people start talking about it. So I'm excited.
That's a good segue into he and I have created a product together because we believe in Kratom so much. It's helped us so much. It's helped us manage pain. It's helped us to continue on our diets even. Sometimes in life you just need something else to do. You need your mind to be a little bit distracted from your day-to-day grind, and it's a great product. It gives you some euphoria. It's helped me with creativity and business and stuff like that, and the product's going to be called Mind Bullet, and you'll be able to get it at mindbullet.com.
All right. So we're going to link in the show notes to where people can find you, Chris, on social, where they can see all the stuff you've put out. I'm actually really excited to hear. I didn't even realize, I'm embarrassed to say, that you had this YouTube channel with all of these videos, because I'm always looking for ways, if I can't plug one of my patients into a trainer that I trust to teach them the correct mechanics, I actually don't want them to just learn to squat on their own. You know, I kind of want them to be able to see how it's done. So this will be a great reference.
As somebody that's contributed content to Mark's YouTube page, I could say that he puts in more effort and time than a lot of people that I see that are putting out videos. They put out almost, is it a video a day? You're still like, they crank at like a breakneck speed to like, it's like a movie studio over there. So he's just constantly cranking stuff out. And it always features like all these people from the fitness industry that people love to see. And he's always got great information. So I commend him as a filmmaker. I'm giving my brother props for having a great YouTube channel.
We spend probably over $250,000 a year just on our YouTube channels just to get information out there. Obviously,
my boys over there.
It promotes the brand, promotes the product, but I really love trying to get that information out there to arm people. Give people information that they need. Anybody listening to this podcast that ever wants to come check out Super Training Gym, Super Training Gym is free. I can't always guarantee that I'm there, but if you want to look up that Instagram, it's at Super Training Gym as well. Hit up whoever answers questions on there, and they will let you know if and when I'm around and when you can come in. But the gym's free.
In and of itself, that is just an unbelievable service. Guys, I want to thank you both, not just for your generosity and time today, but obviously more importantly for all the work you guys have been doing over the past decade plus to share what you've learned with not just me, so I'm personally grateful for that, but obviously by extension, many more people. So
we're personally grateful as well. We're huge fans right back at you. And I love your podcast, so I'm excited to be on it and be part of it.
Well, you guys are part of the inaugural set, and if the podcast ends up sucking, you guys will know that you managed to be in that exclusive set.
We're in good company of sucking.
Sucking podcast, right? All right,
awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
You can find all of this information and more at peterattiamd.com/podcast. There you'll find the show notes, readings, and links related to this episode. You can also find my blog and the Nerd Safari at peterattiamd.com. What's a Nerd Safari, you ask? Just click on the link at the top of the site to learn more. Maybe the simplest thing to do is to sign up for my subjectively non-lame once-a-week email where I'll update you on what I've been up to, the most interesting papers I've read, and all things related to longevity, science, performance, sleep, etc. On social, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, all with the ID Peter Attia MD, but usually Twitter is the best way to reach me to share your questions and comments. Now for the obligatory disclaimer. This podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. And note, no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to the podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, I take conflicts of interest very seriously. For all of my disclosures, the companies I invest in and/or advise, please visit peterattiamd.com/about.